Hello, amazing audience. Thanks for visiting Pika Fiction. Today we unravel the story of what if Ash defeated Cynthia in the Masters 8 and she offered herself as the winner's prize. If stories make your day better, subscribe to join our family. Like and share to spread the love. And now, let's begin our tale. Chapter 1, The Monarch and the Vow. The air in Winden Stadium was a physical thing, thick and electric, tasting of ozone and held breath. On the pristine battlefield below, a scarred patch of earth smoked where a dragon claw had gouged it open moments before. Across that ruin stood Garchomp, a predator carved from mountain stone and violence, its fin-like arms still shimmering with draconic energy. Its yellow eyes, cold and sharp as obsidian flakes, were fixed on the small yellow mouse standing opposite. Pikachu's chest rose and fell in ragged, rapid bursts. One ear was nicked, his fur was matted with dirt and sweat, and a faint tremor ran through his legs. He had fought through a gauntlet of Cynthia's monsters, each a legend in its own right, and he was running on fumes and sheer, belligerent will. High in the commentator's box, the former champion of Galar, Leon, leaned forward, his voice a low, awed murmur carried to millions. I have never seen anything like this. We are witnessing a battle for the ages. Both trainers, both Pokémon, are performing on a level that transcends everything we thought we knew. On the trainer's platform, Ash Ketchum felt the truth of that statement in his bones. His heart hammered a rhythm that seemed to sync with Pikachu's, a frantic beat against the roar of the crowd. He ignored the noise, the lights, the monumental weight of the moment. All that existed was the battlefield, his partner, and the woman opposite him. Cynthia. She stood with an impossible stillness, a statue of poise in the heart of a hurricane. Her long, black coat didn't so much as stir. Her expression was one of intense, serene concentration, the look of a grandmaster who sees the entire board, every possible move, 10 steps ahead. But for the first time in this match, perhaps for the first time in years, Ash saw a flicker of something else in her gray eyes. Not doubt, but appraisal. A dawning realization. He had pushed her. He had forced the invincible champion of Sino to adapt, to counter, to fight from the back foot. His Surfetch'd had broken through her Milotic's defense, his Dracovish had overwhelmed her Roserade with sheer, unpredictable power, and his Lucario had fought her Garchomp to a standstill before finally falling. Now it all came down to this. His first friend, against her last and greatest bastion. Garchomp, Cynthia's voice was calm, carrying across the field without any need for amplification. It was a voice that commanded titans. Dragon Rush. Ash didn't need to see the gathering aura of spectral, blue energy around Garchomp to know what was coming. He felt it in the air, a pressure change, a spike of raw, unrestrained power. Pikachu, wait for it. Ash called, his own voice sharp and clear. Trust. It was the core of everything. He had to trust Pikachu's speed, his own timing, and the bond that had carried them from Pallet Town to this very precipice. Garchomp roared, a sound that shook the stadium's foundations, and launched itself forward. It wasn't a charge, it was an erasure. It became a comet of draconic fury, the air itself screaming as it was torn asunder. The ground cracked beneath its trajectory. Steady, buddy, Ash breathed, his eyes narrowed, tracking the incoming apocalypse. The world seemed to slow down. He could see the individual motes of dust kicked up by the attack, the warp of light around Garchomp's form. This wasn't some mystical power, it was the hyper-focus of a life spent in battle, an instinct honed razor-sharp. The comet was 50 feet away. 30. 10. Now. Quick attack, left. Pikachu became a streak of yellow lightning, a blur that defied the eye. He didn't run from the Dragon Rush, he ran alongside it, a gnat dancing with a meteor. The roar of Garchomp's passage was a physical blow, but Pikachu held his course, his tiny body a vessel of impossible speed. He shot past Garchomp, the slipstream of the larger Pokémon's attack tugging at him. Cynthia's eyes widened, just a fraction. A feint. She had anticipated a direct counter, a clash of power. She had not anticipated evasion that bordered on suicidal. Turn, Iron Tail. Ash commanded, the two commands running together as one. Pikachu's tail flashed, hardening into a blade of polished steel mid-spin. He used the momentum of his quick attack to pivot on one foot, a breathtaking display of agility, and swung the hardened appendage like a headsman's axe. The target wasn't Garchomp's main body, but its right leg, the one planting to pivot for another assault. The clang of metal on scale echoed like a hammer on an anvil. Garchomp let out a grunt of pain and surprise, its turn faltering as its leg buckled. The dragon rush dissipated, its focus broken. Don't give it a second. Thunderbolt. Pikachu landed, his cheeks already sparking with furious, golden energy. He didn't wait to recover. He unleashed the torrent of electricity point blank. The raw, untamed power of 100 storms slammed into Garchomp's side. The mock Pokémon roared, a sound of pure agony this time, staggering back as its body convulsed. In the stands, Lance, the champion of Kanto, stood up without realizing it. Stephen Stone, beside him, merely adjusted his tie, but his silver eyes were wide with disbelief. They were seeing textbook strategies being dismantled by pure, instinctual genius. Ash wasn't just countering moves, he was countering the fundamental rhythm of the battle. Cynthia, however, was already recovering. Her mind processed the setback, calculated, and issued a new command. Garchomp, Stone Edge, all around you. Even in its pain, Garchomp obeyed. It slammed its claws into the ground, and a circle of glowing blue pillars of sharpened rock erupted from the earth around it, a fortress of stone that intercepted the tail end of the thunderbolt and forced Pikachu to leap back to avoid being impaled. Now, Draco Meteor. Ash's blood ran cold. It was the ultimate move. The one that had ended so many of her battles. High above the stadium, a superheated orb of orange energy bloomed, a malevolent sun. She's using the stone edge as a cage, Ash thought, his mind racing. Pikachu was trapped inside the ring of rock pillars with nowhere to run. The meteors would rain down, and it would be over. This was it. The checkmate. He looked at Pikachu, who was looking back at him, his dark eyes filled not with fear, but with unwavering faith. What do we do, Ash? And in that moment of shared connection, an idea sparked. A crazy, reckless, and utterly insane idea. The kind of idea that had defined his entire journey. Pikachu, stand your ground and start spinning. Ash yelled, pouring every ounce of his belief into the command. The crowd murmured in confusion. The commentators were speechless. Spinning. What could spinning possibly do against a Draco Meteor? But Pikachu trusted him. He braced his small feet and began to rotate, faster and faster, becoming a yellow top on the scorched earth. Use Electroweb as you spin. A net of crackling, golden electricity erupted from Pikachu, but because he was spinning, it didn't shoot out. It expanded, wrapping around him like a shield, a vortex of pure energy. The stone edge pillars began to glow as the Electroweb latched onto them, energizing the very cage meant to trap him. Above, Cynthia's eyes were locked on the scene, her brilliant mind finally hitting a wall of sheer unpredictability. What was he doing? The meteors began to fall. Now, Pikachu. Counter shield. Ash roared, his voice raw. It was a move they had developed by accident years ago, a move born from desperation and creativity. Pikachu reversed the polarity of his spin, and the Electroweb, anchored by the stone pillars, became a gyre. The first meteor slammed into the spinning web of electricity and, instead of exploding, it was caught. Its trajectory was bent, redirected, thrown sideways into one of the stone pillars, which shattered under the impact. Then another meteor hit. And another. And another. Pikachu's spinning Electroweb had become a defensive vortex, a shield that didn't block, but redirected. Meteors screamed past him, deflected into the ground, into the remaining pillars, into each other. The battlefield inside the cage became a meat grinder of explosions and shrapnel, a hellscape of fire and rock. And at its center, Pikachu spun, a beacon of defiant gold in the heart of chaos. The final, largest meteor fell, aimed for the dead center. Meet it head on. Iron Tail. Ash bellowed. Pikachu launched himself upwards, a spinning projectile of steel and electricity, straight into the face of the descending fireball. The clash was blinding. For a single, eternal second, all sound in the stadium vanished, sucked into the point of impact. There was only a silent, expanding sphere of white light. Then the sound returned. A cataclysmic boom that vibrated through every seat, every bone, every heart in the arena. The shockwave ripped through the stadium, and the jumbo screens flickered and died. When vision returned, the smoke was a thick, impenetrable blanket over the field. Silence reigned. No one breathed. Who was standing? Had anyone survived that? Slowly, the smoke began to clear. A figure was visible. Tall, imposing, still on its feet. Garchomp. A ragged cheer started to build in the crowd. But then, the smoke thinned further. Garchomp was standing, yes, but its eyes were swirls. Its body swayed for a moment, a titan refusing to acknowledge its own defeat. Then, with a slow, grinding groan of protesting muscle and bone, it crashed forward, its head striking the dirt with a heavy, final thud. Behind it, a small crater smoked in the ground. And lying in the center of it was Pikachu, his body still sparking with residual energy, but he was pushing himself up. He staggered, swayed, then managed to get to his feet. He looked across the field at his fallen foe, then back to Ash, and gave a weak but triumphant, Pikachu. The silence held for one more second. Then, Winden Stadium erupted. The sound was a physical force, a tidal wave of pure, unrestrained jubilation and shock. Ash didn't hear it. He vaulted over the railing of his platform, landing on the soft grass of the infield and sprinting. He didn't stop until he reached his partner, sliding to his knees and scooping the exhausted Pokémon into his arms. "You did it, buddy," Ash whispered, his voice thick with emotion, pressing his forehead against Pikachu's. "You did it. I'm so proud of you." Pikachu just nuzzled into his chest, every muscle in his body trembling with exhaustion. Only then did Ash look up. Across the field, Cynthia was recalling her Garchomp in a silent beam of red light. She then stood for a long moment, her hand on the Pokeball, her gaze fixed on Ash and Pikachu. Her face was unreadable, a mask of graceful composure. But her stillness was different now. It was the stillness of a mountain after an earthquake, the shape the same, but the foundations forever altered. The ceremony was a blur. Diantha, the Pokémon League chairperson and champion of Kalos, placed the grand, golden trophy in his hands. It was heavier than he expected. The flash of cameras was a constant, blinding strobe. The roar of the crowd was a ceaseless ocean. He stood on the podium, Pikachu on his shoulder, his other Pokémon, Dragonite, Gengar, Lucario, Sirfetch'd, and Dracovish, arrayed behind him, all bearing the marks of their hard-fought battles. They had done it. They had reached the absolute summit. World Monarch. It didn't feel real. He shook hands with Leon, who clapped him on the shoulder with a grin that was both congratulatory and rueful. "You, my friend, are a true champion." It was an honor to watch. He saw his friends in the stands, Go, Chloe, Brock, Misty, so many others, all cheering, some crying. He saw his mom, her face a beautiful mix of overwhelming pride and love, Professor Oak standing beside her, looking as though he might spontaneously write a poem. Then, it was Cynthia's turn to speak. A microphone stand was brought to her. She walked to the center of the field, her movements as fluid and elegant as ever. The stadium fell into a respectful hush. They were waiting for the concession, the words of praise for the new victor, the promise to come back stronger. It was the tradition. Today, Cynthia began, her voice resonating through the silent arena, we have witnessed the crowning of a new world monarch. A trainer who, through tenacity, unconventional strategy, and a bond with his Pokémon that can only be described as profound, has reached the pinnacle of our world. She paused, her gray eyes sweeping over the crowd before landing, with unnerving intensity, on Ash. I have held the title of Sino champion for many years. I have studied the myths of my homeland, the stories of heroes, of titans, and of the archetypes of power that shape our reality. I believed I understood what it meant to be strong. I was wrong. A murmur rippled through the stadium. This was not the standard script. Strength is not merely about strategy or the power of one's Pokémon, she continued, her voice gaining a strange, formal cadence. It is about the ability to inspire, to connect, to draw forth a potential that lies dormant. It is about a power that reshapes what is possible. Ash Ketchum has shown us that power today. Ash felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. Where was this going? Cynthia took a step forward, away from the microphone stand. Her voice needed no amplification now. It carried a weight that silenced all else. In the ancient history of the Sino region, when a champion was defeated on their own soil by a challenger who embodied a new archetype of strength, it was not seen as a simple loss. It was seen as a paradigm shift. A sign that the world's balance had found a new fulcrum. She was walking toward him now, her long strides measured and deliberate. The cameras followed her, broadcasting her every move to a bewildered world. Therefore, she declared, stopping a mere 10 feet from the podium where Ash stood, frozen. As the defeated champion of the land of myth and origin, I invoke the Okami no Chikai. The ancient words, spoken in a dialect no one had used for 1,000 years, hung in the air like frost. Professor Oak gasped, his hand flying to his mouth. Lance and Stephen exchanged a look of pure shock. They knew the legends. They just never believed them to be real. Cynthia switched back to the common tongue, her voice ringing with the force of an oath. The archetype's vow. An unbreakable bond of fealty sworn by a defeated guardian to the new center of power. She went down on one knee. The world stopped. Cynthia, the untouchable, the invincible, the proudest and most brilliant champion of a generation, was kneeling in the dirt of the battlefield. Her head was bowed. I, Cynthia of Celestic Town, champion of Sino, do hereby pledge my strength, my knowledge, and my loyalty to the new world monarch, Ash of Pallid Town. Her voice was clear, unwavering, a hammer striking steel. My power is now an extension of your own. My path is now aligned with yours. I will serve as your sword and your shield, your counsel and your right hand, until the day you are, in turn, surpassed by a new archetype. She looked up, her gray eyes locking onto his. There was no shame in them. No defeat. Only a terrifying, absolute certainty. I am yours to command. For the first time in his life, Ash Ketchum was completely, utterly speechless. His mind, which had just navigated the most complex battle of his career, was a blank slate. Pikachu chirped in confusion on his shoulder. No, Ash finally managed, the word clumsy in his mouth. He stepped down from the podium, leaving the trophy behind. No. Get up. Please. He reached for her arm, to help her up, but she didn't move. She was as unyielding as the ground she knelt on. The vow is made, she said, her voice softer now, but no less firm. It cannot be unmade. I don't accept, Ash said, his voice gaining strength. This was wrong. All wrong. We were opponents. Equals. You don't serve me. I won a Pokémon battle, that's all. It was never just a Pokémon battle, Cynthia replied, her gaze unwavering. Not for me. This was a test. And you passed. The stadium was in chaos. People were shouting, officials were running onto the field, looking utterly lost. The broadcast had devolved into stunned, stammering commentators. Ash ignored them all. He stared down at the kneeling woman, the greatest strategic mind he had ever faced, and felt a profound sense of dread that had nothing to do with victory or defeat. He had won the crown, but in the process, he had somehow inherited a kingdom's worth of complications he didn't understand. "Get up," he said again, his voice now a command, not a plea. It held the quiet authority of the monarch he had just become. "We'll talk about this somewhere else. But not like this." For a moment, he thought she would refuse. Then, with a slow, graceful movement, Cynthia rose to her feet. She stood before him, her expression unchanged, but the dynamic between them had been irrevocably shattered and reforged into something new, something ancient and terrifying. "As you command," she said softly. The weight of those 3 words was heavier than any trophy. The private lounge reserved for the champions was a sanctuary of hushed tones and plush leather, but the atmosphere inside was anything but calm. Ash sat on a sofa, Pikachu now asleep in his lap, the exhaustion of the battle finally having claimed him. Across from him, in a stiff-backed armchair, sat Cynthia. She had not spoken a word since they had been ushered away from the pandemonium on the field. Professor Oak paced back and forth in front of a large window overlooking the now darkened city of Wyndon, muttering to himself. "The archetype's vow. I've only ever read about it in the most obscure celestic texts. It was considered a legend, a metaphor for the transfer of political power in the feudal era. It seems it's rather more literal than that, Professor," Lance said, his arms crossed as he leaned against a wall. He looked from Ash to Cynthia, his expression grim. "Cynthia, what have you done?" "I have done what was necessary," she stated, her voice even. Her gaze was fixed on Ash. It was disconcerting, like being analyzed by a supercomputer. "Necessary for what?" Ash finally asked, his voice tight. He had been trying to process it, to find a way to rationalize it, to undo it. But the finality in her tone on the field had felt absolute. "Cynthia, this is insane. You can't just pledge yourself to someone because you lost a match." "It was not because I lost," she corrected him gently. "It was because of how you won. For years, I have been studying the patterns, the prophecies. The increasing frequency of legendary Pokémon encounters, the instability in regional climates, the whispers in the dark. I came to believe that a threat was coming. A threat that strategy alone cannot defeat." Stephen Stone, who had been quietly observing from a corner, spoke up. "A threat? What kind of threat are we talking about? Another Groudon and Kyogre situation?" Cynthia shook her head. "Something older. Something other. A force that predates the concepts of land and sea. In my research, I found references to a coming paradigm shift, a moment when the world would require a new kind of hero. Not a guardian of balance, like a champion, but a catalyst for change. An archetype of connection. The vow was a contingency, a mechanism to ensure that the accumulated knowledge and power of the old guard would be immediately transferred to aid the new." Ash stared at her, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying clang. You threw the match." The accusation was acid on his tongue. A flicker of genuine emotion finally broke through Cynthia's composure. Her eyes flashed with something akin to insult. "Never," she said, her voice dangerously sharp. "To do so would have been to invalidate the entire process. I fought you with every ounce of my being. I pushed my Pokémon to their absolute limits and beyond. I had to be certain. I had to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that you were the one. That your power was genuine." She leaned forward, the intensity in her gaze pinning Ash to his seat. "Your battle with Leon showed your strength. Your climb through the Masters 8 showed your tenacity. But our battle. In our battle, I saw you commune with your Pokémon. I saw you rewrite the rules of combat not with a prepared strategy, but with pure, instantaneous instinct. You don't just command your Pokémon, Ash. You fight with them. Your will becomes their will. That is the archetype of connection. And it is the only thing I believe can stand against what is coming. The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Ash felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This was so much bigger than a Pokemon tournament. So you're just going to, what? Follow me around? Give me battle tips? Ash asked, the absurdity of it all making his voice rise. I will provide you with my research, my resources, and my strategic counsel. I will fight by your side when required. My assets, my homes, my research facilities, my contacts within the archaeological and political spheres, are now at your disposal, she explained, as if reading from an instruction manual. The vow is a binding of purpose. My purpose is now to ensure you are equipped to fulfill yours. And what if I don't want this purpose? Ash shot back, his frustration boiling over. What if I just want to go home, train my Pokemon, and maybe challenge the battle frontier again? What then? That is no longer a choice you can make, Cynthia said, her voice softening again, but losing none of its iron certainty. You do not have to accept the vow for it to be valid. I made it. It is done. And whether you believe in destiny or not, it has found you. The world will need its monarch sooner than you think. Before Ash could formulate a response, the door opened and his mother walked in. Delia Ketchum's face was etched with concern. She looked at the assembled champions, at the palpable tension in the room, and then her eyes settled on her son. Ash, honey, she said, her voice a soothing balm in the charged atmosphere. Are you okay? Ash's frustration deflated in a rush, replaced by a weary sigh. He ran a hand through his messy black hair. I don't know, Mom. I think I just broke something I didn't know could be broken. Delia walked over and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. She looked at Cynthia, not with anger or confusion, but with a mother's perceptive gaze. You believe my son is that important? Cynthia met her gaze and nodded slowly. I believe the world's survival may depend on him. Delia was silent for a long moment, her hand tightening on Ash's shoulder. Then she said, then you had better take good care of him. It wasn't a threat, but it was a promise. The tension in the room shifted. It was no longer just about prophecies and ancient vows. It was grounded, made real, by a mother's love. Ash looked from his mom to Cynthia, the formidable champion who had just irrevocably tied her life to his. He felt the sleeping weight of Pikachu in his lap, the steady presence of the partner who had been with him through everything. He was the world monarch. He was the subject of a mythical vow. He was a linchpin in a prophecy he didn't believe in. And he was tired. So incredibly tired. Okay, he said, the single word cutting through the silence. All eyes turned to him. Okay. I can't force you to break this vow. If you say it's unbreakable, I'll take your word for it. For now. He stood up carefully, gently shifting the sleeping Pikachu into his arms. He faced Cynthia directly. But let's get one thing straight. You're not my servant. You're not my subordinate. You're Cynthia. The Sino champion. We're partners in this, whatever this is. Or we're nothing. I lead by friendship, not by command. Is that understood? Cynthia studied him, her analytical gaze softening into something that looked almost like approval. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Your terms are acceptable. Partnership. Good, Ash said, nodding. He felt like he had just negotiated a treaty with a foreign nation. Now, if you'll all excuse me, I need to get my Pokemon to a Pokemon Center. And then I need to sleep for about a week. As he walked toward the door, his mother and Professor Oak falling into step beside him, Lance called out. Ash. Ash paused and looked back. The Dragon Master's face was serious. If what Cynthia says is true, if even half of it is, be careful. Being the strongest trainer in the world just made you the biggest target. Ash just nodded, a grim understanding dawning on him. He wasn't just at the top of the mountain. He was on the edge of a cliff. He and Cynthia left the lounge together, a strange, silent pair trailed by his concerned mother and professor. The hallways of the stadium were mostly empty now, the cleanup crews working in the distance. The air was cool and quiet. It was a stark contrast to the roaring chaos of a few hours ago. As they passed under a bank of fluorescent lights near an exit, one of the fixtures above them buzzed erratically. For a split second, the light flickered, and in that instant of strobing darkness, the polished floor seemed to lose its reflection. It became a patch of flat, depthless black, a void that drank the light around it. Ash blinked, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him, a side effect of exhaustion. He glanced at Cynthia, but she seemed not to have noticed, her attention focused on the path ahead. The light stabilized. The floor was just a floor again, shiny and normal. He shook his head, dismissing it. It was nothing. Just a faulty ballast in a light fixture. He walked out of the stadium and into the cool night air of Winden, the weight of the sleeping Pokemon in his arms a familiar comfort. But a new, unfamiliar weight had settled on his shoulders. The vow. The prophecy. The world's survival. And in the darkness behind him, unseen by anyone, the faulty light fixture flickered one last time, and then went permanently, silently dark. Chapter 2, An accord of fire and ice. The Gulfstream G650 cut through the stratosphere like a silver needle, its engines a barely there whisper that was utterly drowned out by the roaring silence inside the cabin. Ash had never been on a private jet before. The interior was all cream leather and polished dark wood, a sterile, scentless luxury that felt more like a cage than a mode of transport. He sat on a plush sofa, his knee bouncing with a restless energy that had nowhere to go. Across the aisle, in a high-backed swivel chair, Cynthia sat with a laptop open, her posture as immaculate at 35,000 feet as it had been on the stadium floor. It had been 3 days since the Masters 8 finals. 3 days of logistical chaos, of being shuttled through back entrances and shielded from a press corps that had gone completely feral. Ash's apathetic acceptance of the vow had done nothing to quell the storm, it had only added a thick, syrupy layer of mystery to the proceedings. World monarch bound by ancient fealty to former champion. The headlines screamed. It sounded like something out of one of Chloe's fantasy novels. He glanced over at Cynthia. She was typing, her long fingers moving with swift, economical precision. She wore simple but elegant black slacks and a gray cashmere sweater, her blonde hair pulled back in its usual intricate style. She looked less like a battle-hardened Pokemon champion and more like a CEO closing a multi-billion-dollar merger. The very picture of calm. It was starting to get on his nerves. So, he said, the word loud in the quiet cabin. This is, nice. Cynthia's fingers paused. She looked up, her gray eyes analytical, as if he were a particularly difficult line of code. It is efficient. Commercial flights would have presented complications. You mean people asking why you're following me around like a high-end bodyguard? Ash countered, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Pikachu, who had been dozing on the seat beside him, lifted his head, sensing the tension. He chirped a soft, questioning sound. Ash reached over and scratched him behind the ears, the familiar texture of his fur a grounding comfort. The public perception is irrelevant, Cynthia stated, closing the laptop with a soft click. She turned her chair to face him more directly. Our purpose is what matters. And to that end, we must establish a functional working dynamic. A working dynamic, Ash repeated flatly. Right. Look, can we just talk normally? You don't have to sound like you're briefing a subordinate. We're not a corporation, and I'm not your boss. A small, almost imperceptible line appeared between her brows. My apologies. Old habits. I have spent the majority of my adult life in a position of authority. Adjusting my mode of communication will take time. Just try, Ash said, letting out a breath. For starters, my name is Ash. Not the monarch, not Ketchum, not the archetype. Ash. She considered this for a long moment, as if weighing the strategic implications of a first name. Very well. Ash. My name is Cynthia. Though in Sino, many know me by my birth name, Sharona. The offering felt like a carefully calculated concession, but it was a start. Okay. Cynthia. Where exactly are we going? You said Sino, but Sino is a big place. We are en route to a private airfield near Eterna City, she explained. My family maintains an estate on the outskirts of the forest. It is secluded and equipped with state-of-the-art training facilities. It is the ideal location to begin our partnership. Begin what, exactly? Ash pressed. You keep talking about this threat. What does it look like? Is it a Pokemon? A person? A team like Galactic, but worse? I don't know, she admitted, and the simple honesty of the phrase was more startling than any of her formal pronouncements. My research is fragmented, pieced together from eroded tablets and half-forgotten oral traditions. The texts speak of the Atsuro Nerumano, the Hollowed One, or the Unraveler. It is described not as a being of power, but as a force of anti-existence. A sentient void. The legends say it was sealed away before Arceus shaped reality. My hypothesis is that the seal is weakening. Ash leaned forward, the restlessness in his leg finally stilling. A void? Anti-existence. He had faced down gods. He had stared into the heart of black holes created by rogue Palkia. He had traveled through time with Shalebi. But this sounded different. Less like a monster to be fought and more like a concept that was coming undone. The incidents are small, for now, Cynthia continued, her voice low and serious. Localized distortions. A patch of ocean where compasses spin wildly and the water feels thin. A cave system where echoes arrive before the sounds that make them. They are dismissed as freak geological phenomena. I believe they are symptoms. The world is beginning to fray at the seams. Ash thought back to the flickering light in the stadium corridor, the patch of floor that seemed to drink the light. He had dismissed it as exhaustion. Now, a cold knot formed in his gut. And you think I'm the one who's supposed to, what? Stitch it back together. The prophecies refer to a power that does not conquer, but connects. One that does not destroy, but affirms. When I saw you battle, when I saw the bond you share with your Pokemon, especially with your Pikachu, I recognized it. It's a force of will so strong it can impose its own reality onto the world. Your aura is a part of it, but it's more than that. It is the culmination of every battle you have ever fought, every bond you have ever forged. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw past the champion and the strategist. He saw a scholar, historian who had spent years alone with dusty scrolls and terrifying conclusions, and who was now placing the weight of all that knowledge onto his shoulders. I don't know if I can do what you think I can, Ash said quietly. I do, Cynthia replied, and the certainty in her voice was absolute. My vow was not a leap of faith. It was a calculated investment based on overwhelming evidence. Ash almost laughed at the absurdity of the phrasing, but the sincerity in her eyes stopped him. She truly believed this. She had staked her entire life, her reputation, and her honor on it. The weight of that was staggering. Okay, he said, running a hand through his hair. Okay. We get to this estate. And then we train. We figure out what we're up against. A small smile touched her lips. An excellent plan. The rest of the flight passed in a more comfortable silence. The tension had been replaced by a shared, unspoken understanding of the stakes. This wasn't about a vow of fealty anymore. This was about the world. The Sino air was different. It was clean and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and cold stone. The private airfield was little more than a strip of asphalt carved into a meadow, surrounded by a dense wall of trees. A single black SUV waited for them, a man in a crisp black suit holding the door open. He nodded respectfully to Cynthia. "Welcome home, Lady Sharona." Ash flinched at the title, but Cynthia merely gave a slight nod. "Thank you, Kale." "All quiet?" "As always, milady. The east grounds are prepared as you requested." They drove in silence through winding country roads, the trees a dense canopy overhead. The estate wasn't a glittering palace, as Ash might have imagined. It was a sprawling, single-story structure of dark wood and grey stone that seemed to grow out of the landscape itself. It was elegant, understated, and completely fortified. He could see the subtle glint of security cameras nestled among the eaves. Kale dropped them at the entrance to a path that led away from the main house. "The main training ground is a 10-minute walk, milady. I will have refreshments brought down." "Thank you, Kale. That will be all for now." As the SUV pulled away, Ash looked at Cynthia. "Lady Sharona?" "A vestige of my family's history," she said with a hint of weariness. "Celestic Town is old. My ancestors were the original wardens of the town's lore. The title is more of a historical footnote than anything." "Right," Ash said. He was beginning to realize that with Cynthia, everything was a historical footnote that just happened to still be actively shaping her life. The path opened into a massive clearing. It was a battlefield, but unlike any he had ever seen. It was a vast, sunken basin of earth, grass, and rock, dotted with copses of trees, a meandering stream, and sheer rock faces. It was a controlled wilderness, a place where a Pokémon could use its full power without restraint. "Impressive," Ash said, genuinely awed. "A training environment should reflect the reality of battle," Cynthia stated, shrugging off her cashmere sweater to reveal a simple, black athletic top beneath. "Most official arenas are flat and sterile. They encourage a limited, two-dimensional mode of thinking." She walked to the edge of the basin and turned to him, a new energy in her posture. The scholar was gone. The champion was back. "Before we can face an unknown threat, I need a full diagnostic of your capabilities. Not just you, but us. As a unit." "So, you want to battle?" Ash asked, a familiar spark igniting in his chest. This, he understood. Not against each other. That is counterproductive. We will battle together. She pulled 2 pokeballs from her belt. A 2-on-2 cooperative exercise. Your Lucario and your Infernape. Their blend of disciplined energy and raw power should be illustrative. I will use my Garchomp and my Spiritome. Ash's eyebrows shot up. Her ace and her most unpredictable ghost. This wasn't a light warm-up. He nodded, a grin spreading across his face. The exhaustion and confusion of the past few days evaporated, replaced by the pure, unadulterated thrill of a challenge. You're on. But what are we fighting? Cynthia smiled, a true, brilliant smile this time. It changed her entire face, erasing the cool distance and revealing the fierce joy of a competitor. She tapped a device on her wrist. Them. From hidden alcoves around the basin, a dozen sleek, black drones rose into the air. They were shaped like arrowheads, with glowing blue optical sensors. Simultaneously, 4 large, humanoid robots emerged from panels in the ground. They were heavy, armored, and crackled with electrical energy. Training drones, Mark 7, Cynthia explained. Adaptive combat AI, variable shielding, and non-lethal but powerful energy weapons. Their goal is to subdue our Pokémon by any means necessary. Our goal is to neutralize all of them. Ready? Ready when you are, Ash said, his heart beginning to pound with anticipation. He grabbed the 2 Pokeballs from his belt. Lucario, Infernape, I choose you. With 2 flashes of light, the Aura Pokémon and the Flame Pokémon appeared on the field, their cries sharp and eager. They took in the assembled drones and robots, their bodies tensing for a fight. Cynthia released her own Pokémon. Garchomp emerged with a ground-shaking roar, its gaze sweeping over the targets with predatory contempt. Spiritome materialized from its odd keystone, a vortex of spectral faces cackling with malevolent glee. "The objective is simple," Cynthia said, her voice dropping into a commander's cadence. "Infernape and Garchomp will handle the ground units. Lucario and Spiritome, the aerial drones. Coordinate your movements. Let's begin." Ash barely had time to process the command before the drones opened fire, launching a volley of blue energy bolts. "Lucario, Aura Sphere. Intercept them. Spiritome, Dark Pulse." Cynthia commanded, her words overlapping Ash's thoughts. Lucario sprang into action, forming a sphere of rippling blue energy and launching it into the incoming volley. The sphere exploded, taking out half the bolts in a flash of light. At the same time, Spiritome unleashed a wave of dark, concentric rings that slammed into the remaining drones, sending them spiraling. On the ground, the 4 robots charged. "Infernape, use Flare Blitz." Ash yelled. Garchomp, Dragon Claw and flanked their left. Infernape roared, cloaking itself in a shroud of searing fire and blasting forward like a rocket. It slammed into the lead robot with devastating force, the impact sending up a cloud of steam and molten metal. Garchomp moved with a speed that defied its size, its claws glowing with green energy as it carved through the second robot, shearing it in half. But the remaining 2 robots were already adapting. They raised heavy shields, absorbing a follow-up Mach punch from Infernape. The drones in the air reformed their pattern, concentrating their fire on Lucario. "They're focusing on Lucario. He's the biggest ranged threat," Cynthia analyzed instantly. "Spiritome, use hypnosis on the central cluster. Lucario, double team and keep them moving." Ash shouted. Lucario split into a dozen illusory copies, zigzagging through the air and drawing the drone's fire. The real Lucario weaved through the chaos, charging another aura sphere. Meanwhile, Spiritome's spectral form pulsed with psychic energy. The drones in the center of the formation wavered, their movements becoming erratic as they fell under the hypnotic spell. Now, Garchomp, Stone Edge on the hypnotized drones. Infernape, get in close. Close combat on the shielded robots. Their commands were starting to overlap, a duet of strategy. Garchomp slammed its claws into the ground, and pillars of rock erupted, smashing the confused drones out of the sky. Infernape, a blur of motion, unleashed a furious barrage of punches and kicks on the shielded robots, the impacts ringing like a blacksmith's forge. The shields flickered and died under the overwhelming assault. For a moment, it seemed they had the upper hand. They were powerful, they were fast, and they were dismantling the AI's forces. But then, the AI changed tactics. The remaining 2 ground robots jettisoned their armor, revealing sleeker, faster frames. They abandoned their defensive posture and charged Garchomp, their hands crackling with electricity. Simultaneously, the last half-dozen drones ignored Lucario and dove straight for Infernape. "A coordinated pincer," Cynthia exclaimed. "They've identified Infernape's blaze ability as the biggest potential threat and Garchomp's 4x weakness to ice, which their systems can replicate with cryoenergy. They're splitting our heavy hitters. Infernape, dig. Get underground." Ash yelled. Infernape tunneled into the earth just as the drones unleashed a combined beam of freezing energy, frosting the ground where he had been standing. But the ground robots were on Garchomp, landing heavy, electrified punches that made the land shark roar in pain and fury. "Garchomp, use Brick Break to create distance," Cynthia commanded, her voice sharp with urgency. Garchomp smashed a fist into the ground, the shockwave forcing the robots back, but it was only a momentary reprieve. "This isn't working," Ash said, watching the chaos unfold. "We're fighting as 2 separate units. We're just giving them 2 targets to isolate." Cynthia looked at him, her gray eyes intense. "What do you suggest?" A wild idea, born from 1,000 chaotic battles, sparked in Ash's mind. We switch. Completely. Do the last thing the AI would expect. She didn't question him. She didn't ask for an explanation. She saw the look in his eyes and made a split-second decision. Give the command. Lucario, forget the drones. Bone Rush, get down there and help Garchomp. Infernape, burst out and use Flare Blitz on the drones, don't let them regroup. It was tactical madness. He was sending his aura-wielding ranged fighter into a close-quarters brawl and his premier close combat specialist against flying, evasive targets. Lucario didn't hesitate. It formed a staff of glowing blue energy and dove, intercepting one of the robots just as it lunged for Garchomp. It moved like a martial arts master, parrying, striking, and creating openings. The ground exploded, and Infernape erupted from below, not where it had dug down, but directly beneath the cluster of drones. It was a volcanic eruption of fire and fury. The drone's cryo-beams were useless against the overwhelming heat of the flare blitz. Several were instantly vaporized. Cynthia's eyes widened as she saw his plan. It wasn't madness. It was chaos theory put into practice. The AI, which had been programmed to predict and counter logical strategies, was suddenly facing illogical ones. Spiritome, Will-O-Wisp on the robots. Garchomp, support Lucario. Don't attack, just defend, she commanded, instantly adapting to Ash's strategy. Spiritome spat globes of purple fire that attached to the robots, causing their internal systems to overheat. Garchomp, instead of attacking, became a living shield, using its massive body to absorb blows meant for the smaller, more agile Lucario, who was now systematically dismantling the robots with precise bone rush strikes. It's working. Ash yelled, a grin of pure exhilaration on his face. He felt a strange synergy humming between them, a connection forged in the heat of battle. He didn't have to explain his reasoning, she just understood. The last drones are fleeing. Cynthia called out. They're trying to reach the basin edge to recharge. We're not done yet. Ash roared. He felt a surge of energy, a familiar power welling up inside him. He closed his eyes, focusing. Lucario, I'm with you. Use the aura. He thrust his hands forward. A visible wave of blue energy, his own aura, flowed from him and enveloped Lucario. The aura Pokémon's power skyrocketed, the air around it crackling. Cynthia stared, mesmerized. She had read about this, the ability of a true aura guardian to resonate with their Pokémon, but seeing it was something else entirely. It was raw, primal, and beautiful. Infernape, full power. Blaze is active. Ash shouted. Infernape, battered and bruised but burning with incredible power, landed on the ground, its entire body wreathed in a roaring inferno. Garchomp, Draco Meteor. Now, Cynthia said, her voice a low, awed whisper. Spiritome, clear a path with Psychic. Spiritome's eyes glowed, and the wreckage littering the field was telekinetically hurled aside. Garchomp tilted its head back and fired a single, massive orb of orange energy into the sky. Lucario, Aura Sphere. Infernape, Flamethrower. Aim for the Draco Meteor. Ash commanded, pouring all his will into the final attack. Lucario, glowing with Ash's power, formed its largest aura sphere ever, a swirling vortex of blue energy. Infernape unleashed a torrent of fire so intense it was almost white. Both attacks streaked into the sky, slamming into the Draco Meteor just as it reached its apex. The result was not an explosion. It was a controlled detonation. The Draco Meteor shattered into hundreds of smaller, guided projectiles, each one now supercharged with both aura and fire. They didn't fall randomly. They rained down like a swarm of intelligent missiles, hunting down the final drones and the smoldering husks of the robots with unerring accuracy. The basin was filled with a fusillade of light and sound. When it faded, there was only silence. Every single target had been neutralized, reduced to smoking slag. In the center of the field, the four Pokémon stood, panting and covered in soot. Ash was breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead, the expenditure of aura leaving him drained but buzzing with adrenaline. He looked over at Cynthia. Her usual perfect composure was gone. Her hair was slightly mussed, her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and sheer, unadulterated excitement. That, she breathed, was the most beautifully chaotic and strategically brilliant display of Pokémon battling I have ever witnessed. Ash grinned, feeling a genuine warmth spread through his chest. We make a pretty good team. Good is an understatement, she corrected, walking toward him. The awkward distance from the plane felt like a lifetime ago. The fusion of your unpredictable, overwhelming offense with my structured control, the potential is logarithmic. Logawatt? She laughed, a real, genuine laugh. It was a wonderful sound. It means our power together isn't 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = 10. Or 100. Before they could say more, a tremor ran through the ground. It wasn't violent, more like a deep, discordant hum that vibrated up through the soles of their feet. The air grew strangely cold. What was that? Ash asked, instantly on alert. Their Pokémon, despite their exhaustion, tensed up, growling. At the edge of the training ground, Kale, the driver, came running down the path, his face pale. Lady Sharona. There's something wrong in the forest. The eastern section. The trees, he stammered, pointing. They're shimmering. Ash and Cynthia exchanged a look. The comfortable thrill of their training battle vanished, replaced by a cold dread. It was starting. The eastern edge of Eterna Forest was a place of ancient, towering trees that had stood for centuries. Now, it was a place of temporal madness. As they drew closer, the scene became increasingly surreal. A massive oak tree would flicker, and for a second, it would be a tender sapling, then a gnarled, dying husk, before snapping back to its proper age. The air itself seemed to ripple, and the chirping of starly echoed strangely, the sound arriving a full second before their beaks moved. Patches of ground were covered in frost, while inches away, summer flowers bloomed and withered in the span of a breath. It's a localized reality distortion, Cynthia murmured, her voice tight with grim confirmation. She had her Garchomp and a newly summoned Togekiss out, their bodies rigid with tension. Ash stood beside her, Lucario and Pikachu at his side, the electric mouse's cheeks sparking nervously. This is what you were talking about, Ash said, his eyes scanning the shimmering, unstable woods. It's worse than I imagined. The Unraveler's influence, she confirmed. It's leaking into our world, and it's decaying the very laws of physics. We have to find the anchor point. These distortions are always centered on something, a powerful energy source, a rare geological formation, or a living being. They pushed deeper into the shimmering haze, the world growing more unstable with every step. Ash felt the instability as a nauseating pressure in his skull, a constant sense of vertigo. He saw a Bidoof phase partially out of existence, its form becoming transparent for a moment before solidifying again. The poor Pokémon looked terrified, scurrying away into the undergrowth. Then they heard it. A sound of splintering wood and a deep, groaning roar of agony. It was the sound of a forest dying. They broke into a clearing and stopped dead. In the center stood a Trevenant, but it was unlike any they had ever seen. It was colossal, its bark thick as armor, its branches like gnarled arms. It was clearly an ancient guardian of this forest. But it was being unmade. Patches of its body were dissolving into shimmering, black voids, like holes burned into reality itself. Its single, red eye was not glowing with rage, but with a flat, terrifying nothingness. The distortion was anchored to it, pulsing out from its corrupted form. The Pokémon was in agony, lashing out blindly. A thick, shadowy tendril of energy shot from one of its branches and smashed into a nearby rock, which didn't just shatter, it ceased to exist, leaving behind a perfectly smooth, concave indentation. It's being used as a conduit, Cynthia breathed, her strategic mind instantly analyzing the situation. Its life force, its connection to the forest, is what the Unraveler's influence has latched onto. We can't just attack it, Ash said, feeling the creature's immense pain through his aura. It was a cold, hollow agony, the terror of being erased. It's a victim, not a monster. Attacking it would only feed the distortion more energy, Cynthia agreed. This isn't a battle to be won with force. She looked at him, her gray eyes locking with his. You said you felt its pain. Ash nodded. It's cold. Empty. Like it's forgetting how to exist. Your aura, she said, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place for her. The prophecies, the power that affirms. You have to get to it, make contact. You have to remind it of what it is. The Trevenant let out another roar, and a wave of temporal energy washed over them. Ash saw Cynthia's toad-kiss flicker, its wings beating in slow motion for a second. Easier said than done, Ash said grimly. How do I get close without being erased? Cynthia's jaw set with determination. The champion was back, in full command. That's my job. I can't fix the distortion, but I can control the battlefield. I will create a window for you. Garchomp, Togekiss, Lucario, Pikachu, your goal is not to harm the Trevenant. Your goal is to run interference. Defend Ash. Draw its fire. Keep its attention. Do you understand? The 4 Pokémon gave cries of affirmation. Lucario looked at Ash, a silent question in its red eyes. Ash placed a hand on its shoulder. We're doing this together, buddy. I will give you 30 seconds, Cynthia stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. Be ready. Garchomp, Earth Power, left flank. Togekiss, Air Slash, high and right. Create a crossfire, force it to divide its attention. The battle began. Garchomp slammed the ground, and a fissure of golden energy raced toward the Trevenant. Togekiss unleashed a volley of sharp, silver blades of air. The attacks weren't aimed to hit, but to box the creature in. The Trevenant roared, its void-like eye swinging between the two threats. It lashed out with 2 shadow tendrils, which Garchomp and Togekiss deftly evaded. The window is unstable. It's reacting to our energy. Pikachu, Thunderbolt, straight up. Lucario, Aura Sphere, but detonated over its head. Disorient it. Ash commanded, his mind working in sync with Cynthia's. Pikachu leaped into the air and unleashed a massive bolt of lightning into the sky. Lucario fired its sphere, which exploded like a flashbang, a disorienting pulse of pure aura. The Trevenant flinched, its attention drawn upward for a precious second. Now, Ash. Go. Cynthia yelled. Ash didn't hesitate. He broke from cover and sprinted across the clearing. The air was thick and heavy, like running through water. Time seemed to warp around him. He saw the grass at his feet age and turn to dust, only to be replaced by fresh green shoots. He ignored it, his eyes locked on the suffering Titan. The Trevenant saw him. Its empty eye fixed on him, and it raised a branch arm wreathed in phantom force. Garchomp, intercept. Cynthia screamed. Garchomp moved like a blur, appearing in front of Ash and taking the full force of the blow on its armored back. It roared, staggering, but it held its ground. It bought Ash the second he needed. He reached the Trevenant. He leaped, slamming his palm flat against the ancient, gnarled bark, away from the patches of corrosive nothingness. And he pushed. He poured his aura, his life force, his very will into the creature. It wasn't an attack. It was a transfusion. He didn't fight the cold void he felt seeping into him. Instead, he projected everything that was the opposite of it. He flooded the Trevenant's fading consciousness with the warmth of the sun, the feeling of roots deep in the earth, the memory of sheltering smaller Pokémon from a storm, the centuries of quiet, steady growth. He projected connection, life, existence. You are the heart of this forest. He thought, his own energy draining at an alarming rate. You are a guardian. You are life. Remember. For a terrifying moment, the nothingness pushed back. A wave of cold despair washed over him, whispering of the peace of oblivion, the futility of existence. It was seductive and horrifying. He felt his own consciousness start to fray. Then, he felt another presence join his. Lucario had placed a paw on his back, adding its own aura to his, a steady, disciplined current that reinforced his own. And beyond that, he felt the unwavering belief of Cynthia and her Pokémon, a shield of trust holding the chaos at bay. He wasn't alone. And that made all the difference. With a final, desperate surge, he poured everything he had into the Trevenant. A wave of brilliant, green light erupted from the point of his touch. It expanded outwards, washing over the clearing. The shimmering distortions vanished. The air stilled. The out-of-sync sounds snapped back into place. The patches of black nothingness on the Trevenant's body dissolved, replaced by healthy, solid bark. Its single eye flickered, and the void was gone, replaced by a soft, gentle red glow. The ancient Pokémon swayed, its great strength spent. It looked down at Ash, then at Lucario. It raised one of its massive branch arms, not to attack, but to gently brush against Ash's shoulder in a gesture of profound gratitude. Then, with a weary groan, it sank into the earth, its form merging with the ground to rest and heal. Ash stumbled back, his legs giving out. The world swam in his vision. Lucario caught him, holding him steady. He was utterly drained, but he was smiling. Cynthia rushed to his side, Garchomp and Togekiss following. Her face was a mixture of relief, awe, and deep concern. Ash? Are you alright? Yeah, he panted, leaning heavily on Lucario. Just, need a minute. And maybe a sandwich. She knelt in front of him, her analytical gray eyes scanning him for injury. Finding none, she simply stayed there for a moment, the silence charged with the aftermath of what they had just accomplished. The vow, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I made it as a strategic necessity. A way to give you the tools I thought you'd need. She looked at the peaceful clearing, at the spot where the Trevenant had vanished. I was wrong. The vow wasn't for you. It was for me. It was the only way I could be a part of this. A part of what you can do. The formality was gone. The titles were gone. There was only a woman who had seen something she'd only ever read about, something she thought might be a myth, and was now faced with the terrifying, brilliant reality of it. Ash looked at her, at this incredible, powerful woman who was looking at him not as a monarch or an archetype, but as a partner. And he knew, with a certainty that echoed the core of his own being, that he couldn't have done it without her. Partners, remember? He said, offering a tired but genuine smile. She returned it, a small, true smile of her own. Partners. High on a distant, pine-covered ridge, a figure lowered a pair of high-tech binoculars. The man was dressed in dark, functional clothing, his face sharp and emotionless. Malachi watched the two trainers and their Pokémon in the clearing below, his expression one of cold, academic interest. He tapped a few notes into a datapad he held. Subject Alpha, Ash Ketchum high-level aura projection confirmed. Capable of stabilizing and reversing localized reality decay via empathetic resonance. Energy expenditure is significant, creating moments of vulnerability. Subject Gamma, Cynthia/Sharona tactical acumen serves as a significant force multiplier. Defensive strategies are flawless. Her presence enabled Subject Alpha's success. The synergy is developing faster than projected. He paused, his thumb hovering over the screen. Conclusion, the bond is the fulcrum of their power. It is not merely a strategic alliance, it is becoming an emotional and metaphysical one. Direct confrontation is inefficient. The bond itself must be targeted. It must be broken. He switched off the datapad, the screen going dark. He gave the clearing one last look, his eyes utterly devoid of warmth. Then, as silently as a shadow, he turned and melted back into the trees. Chapter 3, The Celestic Prophecy. The library in Cynthia's ancestral home was not a room, it was the heart of the estate. It wasn't a place for casual reading. It was a vault, a sanctum dedicated to the preservation of knowledge that the rest of the world had long forgotten. 2 stories high, with dark wood shelves climbing to a vaulted ceiling, it smelled of aged paper, leather, and the clean, dry scent of meticulously controlled humidity. There were no windows. The only light came from soft, indirect lamps that cast a warm, golden glow on the spines of countless books, scrolls, and clay tablets. For 2 days, this had been their world. The immediate afterglow of their success in Eterna Forest had quickly given way to the sobering reality of what it represented. It was proof of concept. The Unraveler was real, its influence was spreading, and Ash's aura was, for now, the only known cure. This realization had settled over them, not as a victory, but as the confirmation of a terrifying diagnosis. Ash sat at a massive oak table, a dozen scrolls carefully laid out before him. The script was an archaic form of Sinahan, jagged and complex. A week ago, it would have been gibberish. Now, with Cynthia's patient tutoring, he could pick out words. Void. Silent. Unmaking. Seal. The vocabulary of nightmares. It's like trying to build a puzzle with half the pieces missing and the other half from a different box, he muttered, rubbing his temples. The mental exhaustion was a different beast from the physical drain of battle. It was a slow, grinding fatigue. Across the table, Cynthia looked up from a thick, leather-bound codex. She had shed her public persona entirely. Here, in her family's sanctum, she was a scholar in her element. She wore comfortable trousers and a simple white blouse, her hair was tied back loosely, and a pair of reading glasses were perched on her nose. The sight was so different from the invincible champion that Ash still found it slightly jarring. That is the nature of history, she said, her voice soft. We are working with the echoes of events that transpired before time, as we know it, was a stable concept. The accounts are contradictory, more myth than record. But they all agree on one thing, Ash said, pointing a finger at a recurring symbol on one of the scrolls, a perfect circle with a crack running through it. Something is sealed away. And something is breaking it. The seal of origin. According to the most cohesive texts, when Arceus first began to shape reality, it did not create from nothing. It created in opposition to nothing. The Unraveler was the pre-existing state. Arceus pushed it back, contained it behind a conceptual barrier woven from the very laws of existence it was creating, time, space, and antimatter. She took off her glasses, her gray eyes locking onto his. The conduits for that seal were the 3 beings it created to govern those concepts. Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina. The recent, unprecedented conflicts involving all 3, from Team Galactic's plot at Spearpillar to the events in Alamos Town and the Reverse World, they have weakened the integrity of the seal on a fundamental level. Ash's mind reeled. He had been there for all of it. He had fought to save Dialga and Palkia, had traveled with Giratina. He wasn't just a bystander who happened to have the solution, his entire journey had been interwoven with the cause of the problem. So all those times, we weren't just saving the world. We were accidentally chipping away at the padlock on its prison. An unavoidable consequence, Cynthia said. Your actions prevented immediate catastrophe, but they contributed to a long-term vulnerability. It is the ultimate paradox. She gestured to the scrolls. And that is where the prophecy of the archetype comes in. She stood and walked over to a glass case against the wall. Inside, resting on a velvet cushion, was a single, smooth slate of obsidian covered in faint, silvery etchings. This is the Celestic Stela. The oldest artifact in my family's possession. It's the origin of the vow, and the prophecy. Ash joined her, looking at the ancient tablet. The etchings were different from the scrolls, more fluid and abstract. He could make out the shapes of the 3 legendary dragons, and below them, a depiction of a human figure, their hand outstretched towards a smaller, non-humanoid shape, a Pokémon. A faint aura surrounded them both. It says that when the seal of origin falters, the world will not be saved by the guardians of its laws, Cynthia translated, her finger tracing the lines without touching the glass. For they are the lock, and they are broken. It will be saved by an anomaly. A keystone of will, unbound by law or destiny. One whose power is not inherent, but forged through connection. The archetype of connection. Me and Pikachu, Ash breathed, seeing the 2 figures on the stela with sudden clarity. Or you and any of your Pokémon, Cynthia corrected. The bond is the power, not the specific individual. The prophecy states that this archetype will have the ability to reaffirm existence where it has been unmade. To face the void not with power, but with purpose. A heavy silence settled between them. Ash stared at the etching, at the tiny, ancient depiction of himself, and felt a profound, almost crushing sense of fatalism. He had spent his entire life forging his own path, fueled by a simple desire to be the very best, to meet new friends, to see new Pokémon. The idea that it had all been a prelude, a path laid out for him by some cosmic prophecy, was repellent. No, he said, the word sharp and final. He turned away from the case, his fists clenched at his sides. I don't buy it. Cynthia turned, surprised by the vehemence in his tone. Ash? This, he said, gesturing around the library, at the scrolls, at the stela. This whole idea that I'm some chosen one walking a predestined path. I reject it. Completely. He began to pace, the restless energy from the plane ride returning with a vengeance. My bond with Pikachu? That wasn't given to me by a prophecy. I earned it. We earned it. Through every battle, every loss, every single day since he shocked the spit out of me in Professor Oak's lab. My aura. I didn't even know what it was for years. It's a part of me, but it doesn't define me. I define it, by what I choose to do with it. He stopped and faced her, his eyes blazing with a conviction that was as raw and powerful as any flare blitz. We saved that Trevenant because it was the right thing to do. Because it was in pain, and we had the power to help it. Not because some dusty old rock said we were supposed to. My choices are my own. They always have been, and they always will be. This was their first true conflict. Not a disagreement over battle strategy, but a fundamental clash of ideologies. Cynthia, the scholar, the historian, the woman from a land of myth, who saw the world as a grand, intricate tapestry of cause, effect, and destiny. And Ash, the boy from Pallet Town, the eternal adventurer, who saw the world as an open road, a series of choices and consequences. Cynthia looked at him, her expression unreadable. He expected an argument, a lecture on the folly of ignoring history. Instead, her lips curved into a slow, contemplative smile. Of course you do, she said, her voice laced with a strange mix of admiration and irony. A true keystone of will, unbound by law or destiny, would, by definition, have to reject the very idea of destiny. Ash blinked, the wind taken out of his sails. What? The prophecy may not be a script that you are forced to follow, Ash, she explained, walking back towards the table. Perhaps it is simply a weather forecast. It doesn't cause the storm. It just tells you a storm is coming, and describes the kind of person who will be able to stand in the rain. She picked up one of the scrolls. Whether you are the archetype by destiny or by coincidence is irrelevant. You are here. You have the ability. The storm is coming. The only thing that matters is what we do next. Her ability to reframe the argument, to find a synthesis between their opposing views, was as sharp and effective as any of her Garchomp's attacks. She hadn't surrendered her position, but she had validated his, finding a common ground built on pragmatism. Before Ash could respond, the deep, resonant chime of an old bell echoed through the estate. It was a rich, bronze tone, a sound from another era. Cynthia's head snapped up, a look of genuine surprise on her face. "A visitor? Is that unusual?" Ash asked. "This estate is unplottable on any public map. The only road leading here is private and unmarked. No one arrives unannounced." They left the library and walked down a long, stone corridor toward the front of the house. Cale, the driver and head of security, met them in the entrance hall. "Milady," he said, his expression troubled. "There is someone at the gate. He claims to be an old acquaintance of Master Ash." "Of me?" Ash asked, confused. None of his friends even knew he was in Sino, let alone here. "He gave a name," Cale said, looking at a datapad in his hand. "Paul. From Veilstone City." Ash's heart skipped a beat. Paul. The name conjured a maelstrom of memories. The bitter rivalry, the clashing philosophies, the brutal battles. The crushing defeat at Lake Acuity. The final, hard-fought victory in the Sino League that had earned him Paul's grudging, almost imperceptible respect. They hadn't spoken in years. "Paul." Ash breathed. "What is he doing here?" "He is the reigning gym leader of Veilstone City. And a formidable trainer in his own right," Cynthia supplied, her mind already working. "But how he found this place, that is a significant question." She looked at Ash. "Do you wish to see him?" Did he? Part of him wanted to say no, to retreat back to the sanctuary of the library and the monumental task at hand. But another part, the part of him that never backed down from a challenge, was curious. Why now? Why here? "Yeah," Ash said, nodding. "Yeah, I do. Let him in." Paul had not changed, and yet he had changed completely. He still wore his customary blue jacket and had the same perpetually unimpressed expression, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. But the angry, dismissive arrogance of his youth had been tempered into a cold, sharp-edged confidence. He was taller, leaner, and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who was used to being the strongest person in any room he entered. He stood in the center of the vast training basin, his gaze sweeping over the arena, taking in the scorched earth and shattered rock from Ash and Cynthia's training session. He looked less like a visitor and more like a predator assessing a new hunting ground. Ash and Cynthia walked down the path to meet him. Paul's dark eyes flickered from Ash to Cynthia, a flicker of something, surprise. Calculation, passing through them before his expression settled back into its neutral mask. "Ketchum," he said, his voice the same flat baritone Ash remembered. It wasn't a greeting, it was an acknowledgement of a fact. "You're harder to find than a shiny Abra." "Paul," Ash replied, his own tone guarded. "It's been a long time. This is a private estate. How did you find it?" Paul shrugged, a minimalist gesture. "Veilstone Gym is a registered Pokemon League facility. That gives me access to certain resources. I tracked the flight plan of a certain unregistered luxury jet leaving Wyndon for a decommissioned private airfield in Sino. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. The world monarch and the Sino champion vanish together, they turn up here. I came to see for myself." Cynthia stepped forward slightly, her presence a silent assertion of authority. "See what, precisely, gym leader?" Paul's gaze met hers, and there was no deference in it. It was the look of one apex predator sizing up another. "The battle. I watched the final. I watched all of them. I saw the power your Lucario used against Leon's Charizard. I saw the strategy you used against Cynthia's Garchomp. It's different. You're different." He turned his full attention back to Ash. "When we battled in the Sino League, you beat me. It was a close thing, but you won. I accepted it. You had finally learned to blend your ridiculous sentimentality with actual strategy. But this is a new level. I need to understand it. I need to measure myself against it." The challenge was as clear and sharp as a shard of ice. He hadn't come for a reunion. He had come for a benchmark. He needed to know how far the gap had grown between them. "You came all this way just to ask for a battle?" Ash asked, a slow smile spreading across his face. This, at least, was familiar territory. "I didn't come to ask," Paul stated. He pulled a single pokeball from his belt. "I came to have one. 3-on-3. The New World Monarch versus the strongest gym leader in Sino. Unless you're afraid the crown is heavier than you can carry." The taunt was vintage Paul, designed to provoke, to test his emotional control. The old Ash would have flared up, shouting about friendship and passion. The new Ash simply chuckled. "You're on, Paul," he said, his voice calm and steady. He turned to Cynthia. "If it's all right with you. It's your training ground." Cynthia looked from Paul's cold determination to Ash's quiet confidence. A flicker of understanding passed through her eyes. This wasn't just a battle for old time's sake. For Ash, it was a test of his new identity. For Paul, it was a pilgrimage. And for her, it was a chance to see Ash's power through the eyes of someone who represented his past. "The field is yours," she said, stepping back to take a position on the sidelines. "Show me what you've learned, Monarch." The title felt different coming from her now. Less like a formal designation and more like an encouraging vote of confidence. Ash and Paul took their positions on opposite sides of the basin. The air, which had been filled with the scent of old books and prophecy, now crackled with the familiar, thrilling energy of an impending Pokémon battle. "The first Pokémon is Torterra," Paul declared, throwing his Pokeball. The continent Pokémon emerged with a ground-shaking thud, the tree on its back ancient and sturdy. It was the starter he had abandoned as a Turtwig, the one Ash had helped train, now fully evolved and a bastion of power. It was a statement. Ash smiled. "A classic. Okay, let's go. Gengar, I choose you." The shadow Pokémon materialized on the field, its wide, maniacal grin a stark contrast to Torterra's stoic presence. A ghost type against a grass/ground? A bold and foolish choice, as usual, Paul commented dryly. Torterra, Stone Edge. Gengar, phase through it. Ash commanded. Torterra stomped its foot, and pillars of rock erupted from the ground, racing towards Gengar. But the shadow Pokémon just cackled, its body becoming insubstantial. The stone pillars passed harmlessly through it as if it were smoke. Now, sludge bomb. Gengar solidified and spat a volley of toxic purple sludge. Protect, Paul said, his voice flat. A green barrier shimmered into existence around Torterra, deflecting the attack. He was as defensively sound as ever. Now, use Frenzy Plant. Massive, thorny roots, thick as pythons, erupted from the ground, tearing through the earth as they converged on Gengar's position. He's trying to lock you down. Gengar, into the shadows. Ash called. Gengar's body melted into the shadow cast by one of the few remaining rock pillars from the training exercise. The Frenzy Plant roots smashed into the ground where it had been, pulverizing the earth, but their target was gone. Impressive trick, Paul acknowledged without inflection. But you can't attack from the shadows. You'll have to re-emerge eventually. Who says he has to? Ash shot back with a grin. Gengar, use the battlefield. From the sidelines, Cynthia watched, her analytical mind breaking down the exchange. Paul's strategy was flawless: cover his weaknesses, control the field, and apply overwhelming force. But Ash wasn't playing on the field anymore. He was playing with it. Gengar's shadow zipped across the ground, moving from the rock's shadow to the shadow cast by Torterra itself. It was right under its opponent's feet. Paul's eyes widened slightly. He had anticipated an attack from another shadow, not his own Pokémon's. Now, Gengar. Ice Punch. A spectral purple fist, coated in a layer of jagged ice, erupted from the shadow at Torterra's feet and slammed upward into its underbelly. Torterra roared in pain, staggering back. It was a 4x super effective hit, delivered from an impossible angle. How? Paul demanded, his composure finally cracking. Jengar's gotten good at using shadows as doorways, Ash explained. It's not just hiding, it's traveling. Torterra, earthquake. Erase every shadow on the field. Paul commanded, recovering instantly. Torterra reared up and slammed down with its full weight. A massive shockwave radiated outwards, the entire basin shaking violently. The rock pillar casting Jengar's original shadow crumbled to dust. But it was too late. Jengar, return to your own shadow and finish it. Shadow Ball. Ash yelled. As Torterra was completing its earthquake, its own shadow rippled. Jengar emerged from it like a phantom, already having charged a sphere of swirling ghostly energy. It fired the shadow ball point-blank into Torterra's back. The explosion threw the massive Pokémon off its feet. It landed with a crash, struggling to rise before slumping to the ground, its eyes swirls. The first round went to Ash. He had defeated Paul's most defensive Pokémon with a strategy of impossible angles and battlefield manipulation. Paul recalled Torterra without a word, his expression grim. He had come here to measure the gap, and he had just been given his first data point. It was wider than he had thought. Next up, Electivire, he shouted, sending out his thunderbolt-wielding behemoth. Its red eyes locked onto Jengar, sparks flying from its antennae. Jengar, you did great. Take a rest, Ash said, recalling his laughing ghost. Your turn, Surfetched. The wild duck Pokémon strode onto the field, its leek lance held at a ready angle, its shield polished and gleaming. Its expression was one of noble, unwavering resolve. From the sidelines, Cynthia leaned forward. This was a fascinating matchup. Surfetched's pure fighting type against Electivire's pure electric. A contest of raw power versus disciplined skill. Electivire, Thunder Punch. Surfetched, Meteor Assault. This was the clash Paul wanted. A direct test of strength. Electivire's fist crackled with a storm's worth of electricity as it charged. Surfetched lowered its lance, a brilliant golden aura surrounding it as it braced for its ultimate attack. They met in the center of the field with a deafening boom. The collision of raw electricity and focused fighting spirit created a shockwave that kicked up a massive cloud of dust. When it cleared, Surfetched was on one knee, its shield scorched, its body trembling from the electric shock. But it was still up. Electivire had been thrown back several feet, shaking its head, surprised by the sheer force of the impact. Meteor Assault had left it drained, however. Surfetched couldn't move. Now. Giga Impact. Paul roared, seizing the opportunity. Electivire charged, its body wreathed in a spiraling shroud of purple and gold energy. It was a finishing move. Ash didn't panic. Surfetched. Stand your ground. Detect. It was a move that required absolute focus, a preternatural ability to read an opponent's intent. Surfetched's eyes flashed blue. At the very last possible nanosecond, as Electivire's Giga Impact was about to connect, Surfetched sidestepped. It was not a dodge, it was a movement of inches, a subtle shift of weight. The torrent of energy that was Electivire screamed past, missing by a hair's breadth. The momentum of the missed attack carried Electivire forward, leaving its back completely exposed as it struggled to recover from its own move. Now. Night Slash. Ash commanded. Surfetched, having used a tech to avoid the attack, was not drained. It spun, its leek glowing with a dark, sharp energy, and delivered a vicious slash across Electivire's back. The super-effective dark-type move was devastating. Electivire cried out, its body sparking erratically before it crashed to the ground, defeated. 2-0. Paul recalled his Electivire, his silence more profound than any shout of frustration. He had used his strongest Pokemon, had executed a perfect tactical sequence, and had been dismantled by a single, perfectly timed defensive maneuver that turned his own power against him. Ash hadn't just gotten stronger. He was fighting on a different conceptual level. He wasn't just countering moves, he was countering strategies, turning momentum into a weapon. "Paul," Ash said, his voice gentle, not gloating. "It's not just about power. It's about trust. I trust Surfetch to hold his nerve. I trust him to see the opening." Paul finally looked up, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "I came here for a battle, Ketchum. Not a lecture." He held up his final Pokeball. "This is the culmination of my training philosophy. Power, honed to its absolute peak. Let's see if your trust can stand up to it." He threw the ball, and the creature that emerged made even Cynthia's breath catch in her throat. It was a Metagross, but its coloring was all wrong. Its body was a brilliant, gleaming silver instead of the usual blue, and the X on its face was a striking gold. It was a shiny Metagross. And it radiated an aura of raw, overwhelming power that was palpable even from the sidelines. "A pseudo-legendary, and a shiny one at that," Cynthia murmured. "The computational power of 4 brains, combined with Paul's strategic mind, this is a terrifying opponent." Ash recalled his tired Surfetch with words of praise. He looked at the imposing Metagross, then down at the final Pokeball on his belt. His oldest friend, his rival's partner, the one who carried the spirit of their shared journey. "Infernape, I choose you." The flame Pokemon burst onto the field with a roar, its fiery crown blazing. It had faced Paul's Pokemon before, as a Chimchar abandoned and broken. Now, it stood as a champion, facing its old master's final powerhouse. The history between them was a tangible force in the air. "A fitting end," Paul said. "Metagross, start with Meteor Mash." Metagross's heavy body lifted off the ground with surprising grace. It tucked in its limbs and shot forward like a silver comet, its body glowing with cosmic energy. "Infernape, meet it with Flare Blitz." Ash yelled. The 2 Pokemon, one of fire, one of steel, clashed in a titanic explosion of orange and silver. The sheer force of the impact created a crater in the center of the field. They were thrown back, both taking heavy damage, but both refusing to yield. "Psychic!" Paul commanded. Metagross's golden eyes glowed, and a wave of blue psychic energy slammed into Infernape, lifting it off the ground and holding it suspended in the air, helpless. "Now, Flash Cannon." Metagross opened its mouth, and a sphere of blinding, silver light began to form. From the sidelines, Cynthia's mind raced. Checkmate, she thought. Infernape is immobilized, a psychic type, and a devastatingly powerful steel-type move is about to hit for neutral damage. There's no escape. But Ash wasn't looking for an escape. He was looking for an opening. "Infernape," he roared, his voice filled with an unshakable belief that defied the situation. "Use the fire. All of it. Burn through the psychic." It was an impossible command. One couldn't just burn a psychic hold. It was a contest of wills, and Metagross's 4 brains gave it a psychic grip like a vice. But Infernape heard its trainer. It remembered being a small, scared Chimchar, told it was too weak. It remembered Ash, believing in it, pushing it. It remembered activating Blaze for the first time, the feeling of turning desperation into power. A deep, primal roar tore from Infernape's throat. The flame on its head erupted, growing to an impossible size. Its entire body became a raging inferno, the sheer heat and force of its will so intense that it began to warp the air around it. The blue psychic energy holding it began to hiss and evaporate, like water on a hot skillet. Paul stared in disbelief. Cynthia stood up without realizing it. Infernape broke free. With a final, defiant roar, its blaze ability activated, its body now a living sun. The flash cannon fired, a massive beam of silver energy. But Infernape, now free, didn't dodge. It met the beam head-on, punching it with a fist wreathed in its own supercharged fire. The beam didn't explode. It was consumed. The fire from Infernape's fist traveled up the beam, devouring the steel-type energy and racing toward its source. Metagross had no time to react. The fire slammed into it, and the mighty steel-type cried out as it was engulfed in the very flames of its opponent's will. It crashed to the ground, its silver body blackened with soot, unconscious. Silence. The only sound was the crackle of Infernape's fading flames and its heavy, ragged breathing. Ash had won. He hadn't just defeated Paul. He had systematically dismantled his philosophy of pure, detached power with his own philosophy of trust, creativity, and the unbreakable bond he shared with his Pokémon. Paul stood frozen for a long moment, staring at his defeated ace. He slowly, deliberately, recalled his Metagross. He didn't say anything. He just turned and began to walk away, his shoulders slumped in a way Ash had never seen before. "Paul, wait," Ash called out. Paul stopped, but didn't turn around. "That was a great battle," Ash said, his voice sincere. "Your Metagross is incredible. You're stronger than you've ever been." "Not strong enough," Paul said, his voice low and gravelly. He finally turned, and the look on his face was not anger or bitterness. It was a deep, hollow confusion. The confusion of a man whose entire worldview had been shattered. "I don't understand you, Ketchum. I never have. I trained for power. I optimized for efficiency. I removed emotion from the equation. By all logic, I should have won. But you fight with hope. And it's stronger than logic." He looked from Ash to Cynthia, who was now standing beside Ash, a silent pillar of support. "Whatever it is you two are doing," Paul said, a new, strange tone in his voice, "this power you have. If you ever need another battler, someone who knows how to fight in the dark," he trailed off, then shook his head, as if dismissing the thought. "Just be careful. Power like that doesn't just attract rivals. It attracts monsters." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing up the path without another word. Ash watched him go, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He had won, but it didn't feel like a simple victory. It felt like he had broken something in his old rival. Cynthia placed a hand on his arm. "You didn't break him, Ash." He looked at her, surprised she had read his thoughts. "You gave him a question he can't answer with his old methods," she continued, her gaze following the path Paul had taken. "For a mind like his, that is the first step toward true growth. You may have just gained a powerful, if reluctant, future ally." Ash considered her words. Maybe she was right. He looked at his victorious Infernape, now being congratulated by Pikachu, and felt a surge of pride. He had stood his ground, not just in battle, but for his beliefs. He had faced the specter of prophecy and the ghost of his rivalry and had come out the other side, more certain of who he was than ever before. He looked at Cynthia, at the brilliant, powerful woman who had chosen to stand with him, who understood him in a way no one else could. The vow she had made felt less like a chain now, and more like an anchor. But as the adrenaline of the battle faded, Paul's final words echoed in his mind. "Power like that doesn't just attract rivals. It attracts monsters." The thought was a cold shadow falling over the sunlit victory. They had faced a distortion. They had confirmed a prophecy. They had defeated a rival. But the real fight, the one against the monsters in the dark, had not even truly begun. Chapter 4, The Shadow on Spearpillar. The wind at the summit of Mount Coronet was a living thing. It was an ancient, predatory wind, howling with a voice that had been screaming across the stone since before humans first learned to fear the cold. It tore at Ash's jacket and tried to rip the breath from his lungs. The air was thin, sharp, and tasted of ice and ozone. Below them, the entirety of the Sino region was a patchwork quilt of green forests, blue lakes, and distant, glittering cities, all under a sky so vast and clear it felt like the roof of the world. But they weren't here for the view. They were here for the scar. Spearpillar was not a temple built by human hands. It was a wound in the fabric of the mountain, a place where the veil between worlds was stretched thin. The ruins of ancient colonnades, some shattered, some still standing in defiance of millennia of storms, felt less like a place of worship and more like the skeletal remains of something that had tried to cage the raw power of the place and failed. In the center, where the lustrous and adamant orbs were once housed, the air itself seemed to shimmer, just like it had in Eterna Forest, but on a far grander and more terrifying scale. It was a constant, almost subliminal vibration, a discordant hum that set Ash's teeth on edge and made the aura within him feel like a tuning fork struck against a dissonant chord. "This is it," Cynthia said, her voice tight, barely audible over the wind. She had to shout to be heard. She stood beside him, her long black coat whipped around her by the gale, her face a mask of grim focus. Garchomp was out of its poke ball, a silent, powerful anchor against the gale, its yellow eyes scanning the ruins with a predator's intensity. The epicenter, Ash confirmed, his own gaze fixed on the shimmering air. Pikachu was on his shoulder, his body tense, his cheeks sparking nervously. The sheer concentration of unstable energy was making his fur stand on end. "It feels sick. Like the whole mountain is holding its breath, waiting to break." Their investigation after Paul's departure had become a frantic race against time. Using the data from the Eterna Forest incident and cross-referencing it with historical records of seismic and atmospheric anomalies, Cynthia had created a predictive model. It pointed, with terrifying certainty, to this place. Spearpillar, the point where Dialga and Palkia had been summoned, where Giratina had torn a hole into the reverse world. It was the weakest point in the seal of origin, a frayed seam in reality. "My model predicts a cascade failure," Cynthia shouted, pulling a sophisticated-looking tablet from a pocket inside her coat. The screen glowed with complex equations and a swirling, three-dimensional map of the mountain. The residual energy from Team Galactic's Red Chain experiment created a resonance frequency. The Unraveler's influence is using that frequency to amplify itself. If it reaches critical mass, it won't just be a localized distortion. It will create a permanent breach. A gateway. "So we're here to stop it," Ash said, his voice a statement of fact. "How?" "That's the part my model can't predict," she admitted, her expression frustrated. "We can't just flood the area with aura like you did with the Trevenant. The energies here are too vast, too chaotic. It would be like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. We need to find the focal point, the specific point of ingress, and sever it." She pointed to a spot on the 3D map. "The energy is most concentrated around the remnants of the Dialga altar. That's where we need to start." They moved through the ruins, the wind pushing against them like a physical barrier. The broken stones were covered in a thin layer of frost that didn't melt, despite the clear, bright sun. Strange, half-formed shadows danced at the edge of their vision, twisting into shapes that defied geometry before vanishing. The place felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by the absence of logic. As they reached the raised dais that once housed the altars, the humming intensified. The air here was visibly warped, like looking through thick, rippling heat haze on a winter day. Ash felt a wave of nausea, and Pikachu let out a pained whimper, pressing closer to Ash's neck. "Easy, buddy," Ash soothed, placing a hand on his partner. He focused his aura, creating a small, stable bubble around them. It was a strain, like holding a shield against a rushing river, but the nauseating pressure lessened. Cynthia glanced at him, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Don't expend your energy maintaining a shield for me, Ash. I need you at full strength when we find the source." "I'm not," Ash said through gritted teeth. "I'm just keeping Pikachu from getting his brain scrambled. You seem to be handling this better than I am. My family has lived in Celestic Town for generations," she explained, her gaze sweeping over the warped space. "We're acclimated to background temporal radiation. To me, this just feels like a bad headache. To you and your Pokémon, it's probably like sensory overload." On the dais, a single, broken pillar stood, its top sheared off. At its base, the air was almost liquid, swirling in a slow, black vortex no bigger than a dinner plate. It wasn't a shadow, it was a hole. A patch of pure, unadulterated nothingness. There, Cynthia breathed, her eyes wide. The focal point. It was small, almost pathetic looking, but Ash could feel the sheer wrongness pouring out of it. It was a drain, sucking the very essence of reality into itself. Okay, Ash said, taking a step forward. So I do the thing. I touch it, I pour in the aura, I remind it that it's a rock on a mountain and not a hole in the universe. Be careful, Cynthia warned, her hand resting on one of her poke balls. This isn't a living being. It might not react the same way. Ash nodded, taking a deep breath. He held out his hand, his palm glowing with a soft, blue light. He could feel the coldness radiating from the vortex, the seductive whisper of oblivion that he had felt from the Trevenant, but 100 times stronger. He was inches away when a voice, as cold and sharp as the mountain wind, cut through the air. I would not do that, if I were you. Ash and Cynthia spun around. They were not alone. Standing on the edge of the dais, as if he had materialized from the thin, cold air itself, was a man. He was tall and lean, dressed in simple, dark gray fatigues that seemed to absorb the light. His face was angular, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of a winter storm. It was the man from the ridge above Eterna Forest. It was Malachi. He was not alone. Fanning out behind him, moving with a silent, disciplined precision that spoke of endless training, were a dozen other figures dressed in identical fatigues. Each one had the cold, detached look of a zealot. Garchomp let out a low, guttural growl, moving to place itself between Cynthia and the newcomers. Pikachu's cheeks erupted in a furious shower of sparks. Who are you? Ash demanded, his hand dropping from the vortex, his body shifting into a battle-ready stance. My name is Malachi, the man said, his voice calm and even, betraying no emotion. And you are interfering with a sacred and necessary process. Necessary? Cynthia challenged, her eyes narrowing. You call the unmaking of reality necessary? Malachi's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. It was the smile of a surgeon looking at a tumor. Reality, as forged by the flawed hands of Arceus, is a chaotic, painful, and ultimately meaningless cycle of creation and destruction. It is a failed experiment. We, the children of the silent void, seek not to destroy it, but to correct it. To return it to the purity of its original state. To the perfect, orderly peace of nothingness. Ash stared at him, appalled. That's insane. Life isn't meaningless. The struggle, the joy, the connections, that's what gives it meaning. A charming sentiment, Malachi said, his tone dismissive. But it is the sentiment of a child who cannot see the sickness in the system. You, archetype, are the ultimate expression of that sickness. Your power of connection is a chaotic variable, an emotional contagion that perpetuates the flawed cycle. You are not a savior. You are the final, desperate defense mechanism of a dying world. And we are here to ensure you fail. As he finished speaking, his followers all moved as one. They didn't throw pokeballs. They raised their left arms, each of which was fitted with a strange, dark metal gauntlet. A single, glowing purple crystal was embedded in the back of each one. What is that? Ash asked, a sense of deep unease settling over him. A more efficient method of connection, Malachi said. The bond between a trainer and their Pokémon is a fragile, emotional thing. It can be frayed, broken. Our technology bypasses that weakness. It creates a direct neural link, a perfect synchronization of will. There is no disobedience. No hesitation. Only flawless execution. With a flick of his wrist, Malachi released his own Pokémon. It was an Agron, massive and menacing, its steel armor plating scarred and pitted from countless battles. But its eyes were wrong. They weren't glowing with fighting spirit or loyalty. They were blank, empty, milky white orbs. At the same time, his followers released their Pokémon. A brutal collection of fighters, Tyranitar, Metagross, Salamence, all powerful, all with the same dead, soulless eyes. "You're controlling them," Cynthia breathed, her voice filled with revulsion. "That's not a bond. That's slavery." "It is perfection," Malachi corrected. "Now, witness its efficacy. The mission is simple: subdue the archetype and the champion. Protect the focal point. Do not allow them to interfere with the ritual." The word ritual sent a spike of alarm through Ash. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a diversion. "The vortex!" Ash yelled, turning back to the broken pillar. "He's trying to keep us busy." But it was too late. Malachi's Aggron was already moving, charging with the force of a freight train. "Garchomp, Dragon Claw!" Cynthia commanded. "Pikachu, Thunderbolt!" Garchomp met the Aggron's charge, its glowing green claws clashing against steel armor in a shower of sparks. Pikachu unleashed a massive bolt of lightning, but the Aggron barely flinched, the electricity dissipating harmlessly across its ground/steel typing. The battle erupted into chaos. It was not a Pokémon battle, it was a war. Malachi's forces moved with a terrifying, coordinated grace. The Metagross and Tyranitar formed a defensive wall in front of the pillar, their bodies an impassable barrier of rock and steel, their blank eyes staring forward. The other Pokémon, led by a fearsome Salamence, engaged Ash and Cynthia's Pokémon in a brutal, coordinated assault. Ash sent out his full team. Dragonite, Sirfetch'd, Dracovish, Lucario. Cynthia summoned her Togekiss, Milotic, and Roserade. The air of Spearpillar became a whirlwind of fire, water, dragon energy, and aura. But something was wrong. Ash's Pokémon, the team that had conquered the world, were struggling. Dragonite's Dragon Dance was interrupted by a perfectly timed stone edge from a Tyranitar. Sirfetch'd's Meteor Assault was met not with a block, but with a sacrificial charge from a Conkeldurr that absorbed the hit and allowed a Machamp to land a devastating dynamic punch from the side. They're not fighting to win. Ash realized with a dawning horror. They're fighting for tactical objectives. They're trading their own Pokémon to create openings. They feel no pain, no fear, Cynthia observed grimly, her Milotic weaving through a hail of attacks, firing off icy beams to slow their advance. They are merely tools. Weapons. How do you fight an army that has no regard for its soldiers? The difference in philosophy was their greatest weakness. Ash and Cynthia fought to protect their partners, instinctively shielding them from fatal blows, pulling them back when they were in danger. Malachi's forces had no such limitations. Their Pokémon were disposable assets, and they were being expended with ruthless efficiency. Lucario was locked in a psychic battle with a Gardevoir, its own eyes blank and dead. But the Gardevoir wasn't just attacking Lucario's mind. It was projecting waves of pure despair, a psychic poison designed to sever the link between Ash and his Pokémon. Lucario grunted in pain, clutching its head, the aura connection between it and Ash flickering like a weak signal. "Ash! Your bond!" Cynthia shouted, seeing Lucario falter. "That's their true target. They're not trying to defeat our Pokémon, they're trying to disconnect them from us." Malachi stood back from the fray, observing with the cold detachment of a scientist watching an experiment. His gaze was fixed on Ash. He was the primary target. "Salamence," Malachi said, his voice quiet but carrying over the din of battle. "Dragon Rush. Target the boy." The Salamence, its eyes empty, disengaged from its fight with Dragonite, ignoring a Draco meteor that grazed its wing. It roared, cloaking itself in a spectral blue aura, and shot directly at Ash. "No!" Cynthia screamed. Her Garchomp was still locked in a brutal struggle with the Aggron. Her other Pokémon were tied up. There was no one to intercept. Pikachu leaped from Ash's shoulder, a tiny yellow missile of pure defiance, ready to throw himself in the path of the draconic comet. But Ash acted first. He shoved Pikachu back onto his shoulder and stood his ground. He closed his eyes, his fear and panic melting away, replaced by an ice-cold calm. He felt the raging storm of the battle around him, the pain of his Pokémon, the cold hatred of his enemies. And he reached into the heart of it all. He didn't summon a shield. He didn't try to dodge. He opened himself to his aura completely, letting it flood his senses. The world of color and sound vanished, replaced by a world of pure energy, of will, of connection. He saw the threads of loyalty and love that bound him to his Pokémon. He saw the cold, empty puppet strings that connected Malachi to his. And he saw the raging, hateful torrent of energy that was the Salamence Dragon Rush. He held up a hand. He did not try to block it. He met it. His own aura, the essence of connection and life, surged from his hand and slammed into the Dragon Rush. It wasn't a collision of forces. It was a collision of concepts. The mindless, directed rage of the Salamence crashed against the unshakable, profound will of the archetype. For a moment, there was silence. The Dragon Rush stopped dead, a foot from Ash's palm, the draconic energy churning and boiling as it fought against the pure blue light of his aura. The Salamance's blank, white eyes flickered. For a single, fleeting instant, a flicker of its true self, of confusion and fear, surfaced. It was fighting its master's command, but it was also fighting this strange, warm power that was flooding its senses, reminding it of something other than mindless obedience. And then, with a sound like shattering glass, the Dragon Rush dissipated. The Salamence crashed to the ground, its body convulsing. The blankness in its eyes was gone, replaced by the panicked, wild eyes of a creature in immense pain and confusion. It was free from Malachi's control, but the neural feedback was agonizing. It thrashed for a moment, then fell unconscious. Everyone, on both sides of the battle, stopped. They stared at Ash, who stood with his hand still outstretched, his body glowing with a faint blue light. He had not just stopped a Dragon Rush. He had broken a Pokémon free from Malachi's control with his will alone. Malachi's calm finally broke. A flash of pure, unadulterated fury crossed his face. This was not a variable he had accounted for. The archetype was not just a healer. He was a liberator. Impossible, Malachi hissed. His resonance is strong enough to override a direct neural link. He looked from the fallen Salamence to Ash, and then to the shimmering vortex at the base of the pillar. The ritual. He had been distracted. "You are a greater threat than I calculated," Malachi said, his voice regaining its cold composure, but with a new, sharper edge. He tapped the gauntlet on his arm. "But you are still just one man. Metagross, Tyranitar, lockdown protocol. Full power to the ritual." The Metagross and Tyranitar guarding the pillar began to glow with a dark, purple energy. They turned their backs to the battle and placed their hands, or claws, on the pillar. The small, swirling vortex of nothingness at the pillar's base began to expand, the humming growing into a deafening, soul-shaking roar. The instability of Spearpillar skyrocketed. The very stone beneath their feet seemed to groan in protest. "He's using their life force to power it." Cynthia screamed over the noise. "He's sacrificing them to rip the hole open wider. We have to stop them." Ash roared, but Malachi's remaining forces moved to intercept, forming a wall of bodies. The battle resumed with a new desperation. Ash and Cynthia fought with a singular purpose: break through the line and stop the ritual. But Malachi's forces were just as desperate, throwing themselves in the way, their only goal to buy their master a few more seconds. It was Garchomp who broke the stalemate. With a roar that shook the mountain, it unleashed a Draco meteor, but not at an opponent. It fired it straight up. Then, as it began to fall, Garchomp used Dragon Rush to slam into the meteors, shattering them and sending a shotgun blast of superheated rock and dragon energy across the entire battlefield. It was a move of desperation and incredible power, knocking back friend and foe alike, but it created the opening they needed. Lucario, now! Ash yelled. Lucario, freed from its psychic duel by the chaos, charged through the gap, its body glowing with aura. It leaped onto the dais, a bone rush staff already formed in its hands. It brought the staff down on the back of the Tyranitar. But just as the blow was about to land, the Tyranitar turned. Its eyes were no longer blank. They were filled with a cunning, malevolent intelligence. It caught the bone rush in one clawed hand, its grip like iron. And it spoke, its voice a chorus of grating, metallic sounds that seemed to come from the air itself, not from the Pokémon's mouth. The little beacon of hope, it rasped, the voice a chilling imitation of Malakai's. Too late. The Tyranitar's other hand, glowing with dark energy, slammed into Lucario's chest. A pure, undiluted blast of the Unraveler's influence. It wasn't a Pokémon attack. It was a direct injection of nothingness. Lucario screamed, a sound of pure agony that tore at Ash's soul. The blue of its fur seemed to desaturate, turning a sickly gray. The aura sensors on its head drooped, their light extinguished. It was thrown from the dais, crashing at Ash's feet, its body twitching, its eyes wide with a hollow terror. The connection between them didn't just flicker. It snapped. Ash felt it like a physical blow, a part of himself being violently ripped away. The pain was so intense it brought him to his knees. He looked at the Metagross and Tyranitar. Malachi wasn't controlling them anymore. The Unraveler was. The ritual wasn't to open a gateway. It was to create a host. The vortex of nothingness at the base of the pillar flared, engulfing both the Metagross and the Tyranitar. There was a terrible, wet, grinding sound, and then the two Pokémon began to merge, their bodies dissolving and reforming into a new, monstrous shape. It was a writhing amalgamation of flesh and steel, rock and chitin, all held together by shimmering patches of pure void. It had no head, only a swirling vortex of nothingness where its face should be. The ritual was complete. A lesser avatar of the Unraveler now had a physical foothold in their reality. The creature let out a sound that was not a roar, but a psychic scream of anti-existence that washed over the mountaintop. Ash's remaining Pokémon cried out in pain, staggering back. The controlled Pokémon of Malakai's forces all collapsed, their neural link severed, their bodies smoking. Malachi looked at the monstrosity he had helped create, and for the first time, a look of genuine, ecstatic worship appeared on his face. It is beautiful. The avatar turned its non-face toward Ash. It recognized him. The archetype. The antithesis. Connection, is, fragile, it rasped, its voice the sound of grinding galaxies. It raised a malformed limb, a claw of steel and stone dripping with black void. Cynthia recalled her battered Pokémon in a flash. She grabbed Ash by the arm, hauling him to his feet. Ash, we have to go. We can't fight that thing. We have to get Lucario and get out of here. Ash was barely responsive, his gaze fixed on his fallen partner, his face pale with shock and psychic pain. The severance of their bond had wounded him on a level deeper than flesh. Garchomp unleashed one last, desperate earth power at the avatar, buckling the ground beneath it. The attack did nothing but anger it. But it was the distraction they needed. Cynthia didn't wait for Ash's permission. She recalled the twitching Lucario, scooped up the terrified Pikachu, and practically dragged Ash toward the edge of the pillar and the path leading down the mountain. We are not retreating. Malachi screamed, his fanatical calm shattered. We will offer ourselves to the void. We will. He was cut off as the avatar swiped a clawed hand behind it, not in malice, but in a simple, thoughtless gesture of dismissal. The wave of void energy passed through Malachi's remaining followers. They didn't scream. They simply ceased to be. They were erased, leaving behind nothing. Malachi stared at the empty spaces where his loyal soldiers had been, his face a mask of horrified disbelief. The perfect nothingness he worshipped was not the orderly, peaceful state he had imagined. It was chaotic, unthinking, and utterly without gratitude. As Cynthia dragged Ash away, he looked back one last time. He saw the monstrous avatar of the Unraveler standing on the ruined pillar, a wound in the world. He saw Malachi, on his knees, his faith shattered, staring at the monster he had unleashed. And he felt the howling wind of Spearpillar, no longer just a wind, but a lament for a world that was beginning to unravel. They hadn't just lost a battle. They had witnessed the birth of their true enemy. The shockwave hit them as they scrambled down the treacherous mountain path. It wasn't a blast of force or heat. It was a wave of pure information, a declaration of intent broadcast from the summit. It swept over the entire Sino region in a fraction of a second. Down in Jubilife City, every screen, televisions, phones, billboards, flickered and simultaneously displayed a single, stark image, the seal of origin, the cracked circle, now visibly shattering. Then, they all went dark. In a secure, underground facility far from Sino, 100 technicians stared at their monitors in stunned silence. Alarms, silent and red, blared across the command center. Commander Valerius, a man with a face carved from granite and a uniform so crisp it could cut paper, strode onto the command floor. Report. An aide, pale and trembling, saluted shakily. Sir, at 14:03 Greenwich Mean Time, we detected a massive, ontological energy release. Epicenter, Mount Coronet, Sino region. It's off the scale, sir. It's not a legendary Pokemon. It's a threat classification we don't have a designation for. Valerius stared at the main screen, which now showed a satellite image of Mount Coronet. The summit was obscured by a swirling, black distortion that was interfering with their sensors. Are there any assets in the area? Valerius asked, his voice dangerously quiet. 2, sir, the aide replied, pulling up another file. The faces of Ash Ketchum and Cynthia appeared on the screen. The world monarch and the former Sino champion. Their energy signatures were detected at the epicenter right before the event. Now, they're gone. Valerius's jaw tightened. They're not gone. They're involved. 2 rogue trainers with power that rivals legendaries, at the heart of an unknown, world-level threat. He pointed a finger at the screen. Find them, he commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. The Aegis division is now active. Their primary targets are Ash Ketchum and Cynthia. Bring them in, by any means necessary. They are either the cause of this, or they are the key to stopping it. Either way, they answer to us now. Chapter 5, The Aegis Hunt. The world had shrunk to the size of a damp, moss-covered cave hidden behind a curtain of icy waterfall. For 3 days, this had been their sanctuary and their prison. The roar of the water was a constant, thunderous noise that drowned out all other sound, a ceaseless white noise that was both a shield and an irritant. The air was frigid, heavy with the spray of the cascade, and smelled of wet earth and fear. Ash sat huddled against the cold stone wall, a threadbare blanket pulled tight around his shoulders. He hadn't said more than a dozen words since they'd escaped the mountain. His eyes, usually bright with life and determination, were dull and distant, fixed on the flickering flames of their small campfire. The fire was a small point of defiant warmth in the oppressive cold, fed by a dwindling supply of dry wood Cynthia had gathered. The pain of Lucario's fall had settled deep inside him, a cold, heavy stone in his chest. It wasn't just the grief of seeing his friend so grievously wounded. It was the silence. The place in his mind where Lucario's aura had always been, a steady, calming presence, was now a void. A hollow echo. The severance of their bond was a phantom limb, an ache for something that was gone. He kept reaching for it out of instinct, only to find nothing but a cold, terrifying emptiness. Pikachu lay curled in his lap, not sleeping, but watching him with worried, intelligent eyes. Every so often, he would nudge Ash's hand with his head, a silent offering of comfort that Ash could barely bring himself to acknowledge. Across the fire, Cynthia worked with a grim, focused intensity. The cave floor around her was a mess of technology. Her high-tech tablet was propped against a rock, its screen displaying a scrolling feed of news reports and encrypted chatter she was intercepting from League networks. A portable solar charger lay unfurled, trying to soak up the weak, diffused light that penetrated the waterfall. She was cleaning and servicing their pokeballs, her movements precise and economical, a small, practical task to keep her hands and mind occupied. She glanced at Ash, her brow furrowed with a concern that was deeper than just his silence. She saw the tremor in his hands, the way he flinched at shadows. It was more than just shock. The psychic trauma of the bond severance, combined with the raw exposure to the Unraveler's avatar, had left him deeply wounded. The archetype of connection had been disconnected. Her tablet beeped, a sharp, intrusive sound in the cave's muffled roar. A new report flashed onto the screen, flagged with a high-priority marker. Her eyes narrowed as she read it. "Ash," she said, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through his stupor. He didn't respond. "Ash," she repeated, louder this time. "You need to see this." Slowly, as if moving through deep water, he lifted his head. He looked at the tablet she was holding out. The screen showed a crisp, official-looking press conference. A stern-faced man in a severe black and gray uniform stood at a podium bearing a crest Ash had never seen before, a stylized shield crossed by a lightning bolt. "And let me be clear," the man was saying, his voice resonating with an authority that brooked no argument. "The Aegis Division has been activated under the full authority of the Global Pokémon League Committee. Our mandate is simple, to identify, contain, and neutralize any and all unsanctioned threats involving legendary-level power." The camera zoomed in on his face. It was Commander Valerius. His eyes were like chips of flint. "The ontological event at Mount Coronet represents a clear and present danger to global stability," Valerius continued. Two individuals, Ash Ketchum of Pallet Town and the former Sino champion, Cynthia of Celestic Town, were present at the epicenter. "We have reason to believe they are either directly responsible for this event, or possess key information regarding its nature. As of 0600 hours this morning, they have been designated persons of interest and are considered fugitives from the Pokémon League." The screen behind Valerius changed, displaying their faces. Not the heroic images of a new monarch and a respected champion, but grainy, unflattering surveillance stills. They looked like criminals. They are powerful. They are unpredictable. And they are to be considered extremely dangerous. Any citizen with information regarding their whereabouts is ordered to report it to Aegis authorities immediately. Any attempt to harbor or assist these fugitives will be met with the full force of League law. Cynthia switched off the tablet, the commander's cold, hard words hanging in the damp air. "Fugitives," Ash said, the word a hollow croak. "We were trying to save the world, and now we're the most wanted people in it." "Valerius is a pragmatist, not a villain," Cynthia said, her mind already analyzing the new strategic landscape. "He sees an unprecedented disaster and two powerful, rogue trainers at its heart. To him, we are the most logical variable to control. The Aegis Division isn't like the Pokémon Rangers or the International Police. They're a Black Ops unit. State-of-the-art technology, elite trainers, and the legal authority to do whatever they deem necessary." She looked at him, her gaze sharp. "This cave won't hold us for much longer. They'll be sweeping the mountain with thermal and energy signature scanners. We have to move. We have to get off Coronet and go to ground somewhere they won't think to look." The thought of moving, of facing the world outside their cold, damp refuge, seemed like a monumental task to Ash. He just wanted to sit here, to let the roar of the waterfall wash everything away. He reached for Lucario's pokeball on his belt. He could feel nothing from it. It was just a cold, inert sphere. He had tried to send Lucario out once, the day after the battle. The Aura Pokémon had emerged, but it had been a horrifying sight. It couldn't stand. Its body was still a sickly gray, and it had looked at Ash with eyes that held no recognition, only a deep, hollow fear. He had recalled it immediately, the sight seared into his memory. "I can't," Ash whispered, shaking his head. "I can't fight them. I can't even. I can't feel him, Cynthia. Lucario. It's like a part of me is dead." Cynthia moved around the fire and knelt in front of him. She reached out, her hand hovering for a moment before she gently took the blanket from his shoulders. She looked him straight in the eye, her expression not one of pity, but of fierce, unyielding strength. "Listen to me, Ash," she said, her voice low and intense. "What you are feeling is real. You suffered a profound psychic wound. Malachi did not just attack your Pokémon, he attacked the very core of your power, your ability to connect. But you are still here. You are still the man who stood against a dragon rush with his bare hands. You are still the trainer who earned the loyalty of every Pokémon on your team." She gestured to Pikachu, who was watching them intently. "They don't follow you because of your aura. They follow you because of who you are. Your courage. Your heart. Your refusal to ever give up. That has not been broken. That cannot be broken. You are more than your power, Ash. And right now, your other Pokémon need you. I need you. We are in this together, but I cannot do this alone." Her words were a bucket of ice water, shocking him out of his spiraling despair. She wasn't coddling him. She was challenging him. She was reminding him of the responsibilities that didn't vanish just because he was hurt. His team. Their mission. Their partnership. He looked down at Pikachu, who met his gaze with an expression of unwavering faith. He thought of Dragonite, Surfetch'd, Gengar, Dracovish, they were all counting on him. And he thought of Lucario, trapped in that cold, empty darkness. Giving up wouldn't save him. Slowly, a flicker of the old fire returned to his eyes. It was small, fragile, but it was there. "Okay," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "Okay. What's the plan?" A wave of relief washed over Cynthia's face, so profound it was almost startling. She had been holding her breath, waiting for him to come back to her. "The plan is to be unpredictable," she said, her strategic mind kicking back into high gear. "Aegis will expect us to use my resources, my homes, my contacts. They'll be watching them all. They'll expect us to head for a major city to blend in, or a remote island to hide. We will do none of those things." She pulled up a map of Sino on her tablet. "We are going to do the last thing they would ever expect. We're going to walk into the heart of their surveillance network. We are going to Jubilife City." Getting to Jubilife was a nightmare of paranoia and subterfuge. They couldn't fly. They couldn't use main roads. They traveled by night, sticking to the dense forests and forgotten trails that crisscrossed Sinoa's backcountry. Cynthia, using her encyclopedic knowledge of her home region, navigated them through ancient paths that weren't on any map. The journey was a crucible. Ash was forced to act, to move, to think. He couldn't afford to wallow in his trauma when they had to find food, purify water, and keep watch for Aegis patrols. He began to rely on his other Pokémon in new ways. He used Dragonite for quiet, high-altitude reconnaissance. He used Gengar's phasing ability to scout ahead, a silent, unseen ghost. He was fighting a different kind of battle, one of stealth and survival, and it was slowly, painfully, rebuilding his confidence. His connection to his other Pokémon felt different. It was muted, the vibrant colors of his aura-enhanced empathy washed out into pastel shades. But it was there. He could still feel their loyalty, their concern, their readiness to fight. It was enough. It had to be. They shared quiet moments around small, smokeless fires. He learned more about her in those few days than he had in all their time together. He learned about her childhood in Celestic Town, growing up under the weight of her family's legacy. She told him about her first Pokémon, a stubborn Gibble that refused to listen to anyone, and how she had earned its trust not through dominance, but through patience. My grandmother told me that being a champion wasn't about being the strongest, she said one night, staring into the flames. It was about being a lighthouse. A fixed point of strength and integrity that people could look to in a storm. For years, I thought that meant being invincible. Untouchable. She glanced at him, a wry smile on her lips. You taught me that a lighthouse is useless if it's too far from the shore. True strength is about connection, not isolation. In turn, he told her about his own journey. About his rivalry with Gary, about the friends he'd made, about the legendary Pokemon he'd met and fought alongside. He spoke of his failures as much as his successes. He found that talking about it, sharing the burden, made the cold stone in his chest feel a little bit lighter. One evening, hiding in an abandoned ranger station, Cynthia produced a small, sophisticated device. It was a communications scrambler linked to a satellite phone. There are very few people we can trust, she said, her expression serious. But we need allies. We need information from outside our own bubble. She hesitated, then looked at him. You're Professor Oak. He is more than just a researcher. He is on the Pokemon League committee. He has influence. More importantly, can he be trusted? Absolutely. Ash didn't even have to think about it. With my life. The call was tense. Cynthia's device sliced through layers of encryption, creating a narrow, untraceable window. Professor Oak's face appeared on the small screen, looking tired and older than Ash had ever seen him. Ash. My boy, are you all right? The whole world is looking for you. I'm okay, Professor, Ash said, a wave of relief washing over him at the sound of the familiar, kind voice. We're okay. But we're in trouble. Quickly, concisely, they explained everything. The Unraveler. Malachi. The Avatar on Spearpillar. The Aegis Hunt. As they spoke, Professor Oak's expression shifted from concern to alarm, and then to grim understanding. The Celestic Prophecies. I always thought they were myths, Oak murmured when they had finished. Commander Valerius is a good man, Ash, but he is a hammer, and he sees every problem as a nail. He won't listen to reason without irrefutable proof. Can you help us, Professor? Cynthia asked. We need resources. Information on Aegis movements. A way to fight back. Oak was silent for a long moment, a great weight seeming to settle on his shoulders. Helping you would be an act of treason against the League Committee. I could lose everything. He looked at Ash, his gaze softening. But I have known you since you were a boy, Ash. I have watched you stand up for what is right, time and time again, no matter the cost. And I have never known you to be wrong about something like this. He took a deep breath, his decision made. I will do what I can. I have a few old friends, people who owe me favors, who operate outside the usual channels. There is a man. His code name is Looker. He is one of the best investigators in the international police, but he values justice above protocol. I will contact him. I will tell him to expect a message from a Lady of the Lake. It was a small ray of hope, but it was enough. They had an ally. They weren't completely alone. Jubilife City was a sensory assault. After days in the quiet wilderness, the noise of the traffic, the chatter of the crowds, and the glare of the neon signs were overwhelming. Aegis' presence was everywhere. Stern-faced operatives in their gray uniforms stood on street corners, their eyes scanning the crowds. Drones, sleeker and more advanced than Cynthia's training models, zipped through the sky, their optical sensors glowing an ominous red. The faces of Ash and Cynthia were plastered on every public display, a constant reminder of their fugitive status. They navigated the city like ghosts. They had traded their conspicuous traveling gear for simple, unassuming clothes bought from a second-hand shop in a small town. Ash wore a plain hoodie, the hood pulled low to hide his face. Cynthia had swapped her elegant coat for a simple jacket and had her famous blonde hair tucked up under a beanie, a pair of large sunglasses obscuring her distinctive eyes. They were just two more faces in the teeming metropolis. Their destination was a small, dusty, and altogether unremarkable internet cafe tucked away in a back alley, its sign flickering erratically. Aegis will be monitoring all major network hubs, Cynthia explained as they slipped inside. This place is so old and its technology so outdated, it's likely beneath their notice. The owner is an old acquaintance who values privacy and discreet payment. The cafe was dim and smelled of stale coffee and hot electronics. A few shady-looking characters were hunched over glowing monitors. Cynthia led them to a booth in the darkest corner and began to work on the terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard, inputting strings of code that made Ash's head spin. "I'm creating a multi-layered encrypted tunnel, bounced through a dozen servers from Ore to Alola," she murmured. "It won't last long, but it should be enough to contact Looker's designated dead drop." As she worked, Ash felt a prickle on the back of his neck. The feeling of being watched. He subtly scanned the cafe. His eyes fell on a man sitting alone at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee. He was dressed in a rumpled trench coat, and he seemed to be engrossed in a newspaper. But he was holding the newspaper upside down. Ash's hand moved instinctively toward a poke ball on his belt. He leaned closer to Cynthia. "We've got a tale," he whispered. "Man at the counter. Trench coat." Cynthia's fingers didn't stop typing, but her body tensed. "Aegis? Or something else?" "Doesn't look like Aegis," Ash whispered back. "Too scruffy. Looks more like a PI from a black and white movie." "Got it," Cynthia said, hitting a final key. A simple text interface appeared on the screen. She typed, "Lady of the Lake seeks a view." They waited. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then, a reply appeared. "The view is clearest from the old Floaroma meadow. Midnight. Come alone, or not at all." The message then promptly deleted itself. "Floaroma meadow," Cynthia breathed. "We have a meeting. First, we have to deal with our friend," Ash said, his eyes still on the man at the counter. As if sensing he'd been made, the man in the trench coat folded his newspaper, placed a few coins on the counter, and walked out of the cafe, not even glancing in their direction. "He's leaving," Cynthia said, confused. "No," Ash said, his instincts screaming. "He's repositioning. He wants to follow us when we leave. Let's give him a surprise." He turned to Cynthia, a plan forming in his mind, a spark of the old, reckless creativity in his eyes. "Ready for a little chaos?" A small smile played on her lips. "I'm beginning to enjoy your brand of chaos, Ash." They left the cafe a few minutes later, walking casually down the alley. As they reached the main street, Ash, accidentally, bumped into a street vendor's cart, sending a cascade of apples rolling across the pavement. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he exclaimed, bending down to help the flustered vendor. It was the perfect, mundane distraction. As people stopped and stared, Cynthia slipped away into the crowd. At the same time, from a perpendicular alley, Jengar phased through a wall, completely unseen. The man in the trench coat, watching from a distance, cursed under his breath as he lost sight of Cynthia in the confusion. He focused on Ash, who was still apologizing profusely to the vendor. He decided to follow the boy. The woman couldn't have gone far. He followed Ash for 2 blocks. Ash, for his part, played the role of a lost tourist perfectly, looking at a map, scratching his head, and generally looking clueless. The man in the trench coat was so focused on his target, he didn't notice the shadow that was detaching itself from the buildings and silently floating behind him. Ash led him into another narrow, deserted alley. It was a dead end. He stopped, turned around, and his clueless expression vanished, replaced by a hard, steady gaze. "All right," Ash said. "You can stop following me now." "Who are you?" The man in the trench coat was startled, but he recovered quickly. "Clever boy," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. He reached inside his coat. Before he could pull out whatever he was reaching for, a spectral, purple hand tapped him on the shoulder. He froze. He turned his head slowly to see Jengar's massive, grinning face hovering right next to his own. "Boo," Jengar cackled, its voice echoing in the alley. The man yelped, stumbling back and tripping over a trash can. He landed in a heap, his tough guy facade completely shattered. Cynthia emerged from the shadows at the mouth of the alley, blocking his only exit. "You have two options," she said, her voice cold. "You can tell us who you are and who you work for, or you can explain to my new friend here what your spleen tastes like." Jengar licked its lips with a grotesquely long tongue, for effect. The man scrambled to his feet, holding up his hands in surrender. "All right. All right. Don't let that thing eat me. I'm Looker." Ash and Cynthia exchanged a stunned look. This scruffy, easily spooked man in a trench coat was the legendary investigator. "You're Looker?" Ash asked, skeptical. "Yes. Professor Oak sent me. He said you were being hunted, that you were clever. I was testing you. Seeing if you could spot a tail. A test which, I must say, you passed with, terrifyingly effective colors." He eyed Jengar, which was now floating menacingly above him. Cynthia called Jengar off, and the ghost phased back to Ash's side with a chuckle. Looker straightened his rumpled coat, trying to regain a shred of dignity. "My apologies for the theatrics. The situation is more dire than Professor Oak could explain over the comms. Aegis is not your only problem. It seems your activities on Mount Coronet have awakened other interested parties." He grew serious, his goofy demeanor falling away to reveal the sharp-eyed investigator beneath. "I have been tracking chatter from a source I haven't seen in years. A mercenary, a poacher of legendary Pokémon, known only as J. The name hit Ash like a physical blow. J, the cruel, ruthless hunter who had tried to capture a Riolu, who had petrified Pokémon with her terrifying technology, and who was believed to have died in a fiery crash over Lake Valor. J. Ash breathed. "But she's dead." Reports of her death, it seems, were greatly exaggerated, Looker said grimly. "She's back. And according to my sources, she's been hired by a very wealthy and very anonymous client to acquire a new, unique asset that recently appeared in the Sino region. An asset described as a living gateway of immense power. The Avatar," Cynthia realized with a dawning horror. "Someone hired Jay to capture the Unraveler's avatar." "Precisely," Looker said. "Which means there is now a third faction in this game. Aegis, who wants to contain you. The remnants of Malachi's cult, who want to worship the Avatar. And now Jay, who wants to capture it for profit. It is a three-way powder keg, and you two are standing right in the middle of it." The weight of it all was crushing. A global manhunt, a cosmic entity, and now a ghost from his past, one of the most ruthless villains he had ever faced, were all converging. Ash took a deep breath, the cold alley air steadying him. He looked at Cynthia, at Looker, at Jengar grinning beside him. He wasn't alone. He had partners. He had allies. The hollow feeling in his chest was still there, but it no longer felt like an ending. It felt like a space he had to fill. "All right," Ash said, his voice clear and decisive, the voice of a monarch finding his footing. "Let's go to Floaroma Meadow." In the quiet of the cave they had abandoned on Mount Coronet, a single, inert pokeball lay on the ground, dropped in their hasty retreat. It was Lucario's. The stone floor around it began to shimmer, the air warping. A patch of black void, no bigger than a hand, opened up beside the pokeball. A malformed claw, dripping with nothingness, emerged from the portal. It reached for the pokeball, its touch cold and absolute. But just as it was about to make contact, another presence intervened. A shadowy tendril, not of void but of pure antimatter, shot out from a different distortion and wrapped around the pokeball, snatching it away an instant before the Avatar's claw could close around it. The Avatar's non-face turned towards the new Distortion, sensing a rival power. It let out a silent, psychic scream of fury. In the chaotic, non-Euclidean landscape of the Distortion world, the poke ball materialized, settling gently on a floating rock. Giratina, in its origin for me, regarded the small sphere with its glowing red eyes. It felt the pain of the creature within, the severed bond, the encroaching void. It had felt that same cold nothingness itself. It let out a low, rumbling growl, a promise of guardianship. It owed the boy a debt. And the Lord of the Reverse World always paid its debts. Chapter 6, The heart of the Reversal Flow. Aroma Meadow at midnight was a place of surreal beauty. Under the light of a full moon, the endless fields of flowers were transformed into a sea of silver, blue, and violet, their colors muted and dreamlike. The air was thick with 1,000 competing floral scents, a sweet, heavy perfume that was both intoxicating and cloying. It was a place of profound peace, a stark, almost painful contrast to the chaos that had consumed their lives. But the peace was a lie. Ash felt it the moment they arrived. A tension in the air, a watchfulness that had nothing to do with nocturnal Pokémon. Looker had led them here through a series of switchbacks and false trails, his earlier goofiness replaced by the quiet competence of a seasoned field agent. They stood at the edge of the meadow, hidden in the shadows of a line of tall, silver-barked birch trees. Cynthia was a statue of stillness beside Ash, her senses tuned to the environment, her mind processing every rustle of leaves, every distant cry of a murkrow. "This feels like a trap," Ash murmured, his hand resting on Pikachu's head, the familiar warmth a small comfort. "It almost certainly is," Looker whispered back, adjusting the collar of his trench coat. "The question is, whose trap is it? Aegis? Jay? Or someone else entirely? This is the problem with having so many enemies." "Professor Oak trusted you," Cynthia stated, her voice a low counterpoint to Looker's nervous energy. "That implies you have a plan beyond walking us into an ambush." "Of course," Looker said, puffing out his chest slightly. "Contingencies are my middle name. My real middle name is Fitzwilliam, but it lacks a certain panache. My team is in position on the perimeter. Best of the international police. If Aegis makes a move, we create a diversion, give you a window to escape." "And if it's Jay?" Ash asked, the name leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. Looker's expression became grim. "If it's Jay, we do our best. She's a different class of opponent. Not a soldier, but a predator." A single light flickered on in the center of the meadow, 100 yards away. It was a small, battery-powered lantern, placed on the ground, casting a lonely circle of light on the sea of flowers. "The signal." "Showtime," Looker muttered. "Remember the plan. You two approach. I'll provide overwatch. First sign of trouble, my team moves in. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. This is a reconnaissance mission." Ash and Cynthia exchanged a look. They both knew that plans like these rarely survived first contact with the enemy. Ash gave Pikachu a final scratch behind the ears. "Stay here with Looker, buddy. Be ready." Pikachu chirped in reluctant agreement, his cheeks sparking with contained energy, and leaped from Ash's shoulder to Looker's. The agent yelped as the small, electric mouse settled onto his trench coat, its weight surprisingly solid. With a final, shared nod, Ash and Cynthia stepped out of the shadows and began the long walk toward the light. Every step felt a mile long. The moonlight cast their shadows long and stark across the flowers. They were exposed, vulnerable, bait in a trap of unknown design. As they drew closer, they saw a figure sitting on the ground beside the lantern. It was a woman, her back to them. She had long, dark hair and was wrapped in a simple cloak. She seemed to be sketching in a notepad. The sheer normalcy of it was more unnerving than any overt threat. They stopped 20 feet away. "Are you the one who sent the message?" Cynthia called out, her voice calm and clear. The woman didn't turn around. The view is clearest from the old Floaroma meadow, she said, her voice soft and melodic. It was the correct passphrase. A beautiful night, isn't it? The Gracidia flowers are particularly lovely this time of year. We're not here to talk about flowers, Ash said, his patience worn thin. Who are you? What do you want? The woman sighed, a sound of gentle disappointment. So direct. No appreciation for the finer things. She closed her sketchbook and finally turned to face them. And Ash's blood ran cold. It wasn't Jay. It wasn't Aegis. It was a face he knew, a face he had seen in news reports and at league conferences. It was Laurelai of the Kanto Elite Four. Her fiery red hair was unmistakable, as were the intelligent, analytical eyes behind her glasses. She was dressed not in her usual battle attire, but in the same simple, functional fatigues as Malachi's followers, albeit without the sinister neural gauntlet. Laurelai. Ash breathed, completely blindsided. What are you doing here? Are you with Aegis? Laurelai smiled, a sad, knowing smile. Aegis? No. Commander Valerius is a man of laws and protocols. I have come to believe that laws and protocols are insufficient to address the current crisis. She stood up, her movements fluid and graceful. I am here on behalf of a different organization. A group of trainers, researchers, and even a few gym leaders and Elite Four members from across the regions. People who have seen the signs, just as you have, Cynthia. People who believe the Pokémon League's response is dangerously inadequate. A secret society? Cynthia asked, her voice skeptical but intrigued. Call it a concerned citizens collective, Laurelai said with a wry twist of her lips. We believe the Unraveler is a threat that cannot be fought with conventional means. We have been monitoring you, Ash, since your victory in Winden. We saw what you did in Eterna Forest. We know what you are. And what's that? Ash asked, his guard still up. Hope, Laurelai said simply. A chaotic, unpredictable, but powerful variable. But you are wounded. The Avatar's attack, the severing of your bond with your Lucario, it has dimmed your light. You cannot face this threat in your current state. The personal nature of her knowledge was a shock. They knew about Lucario. They knew about his psychic wound. Why are you telling us this? Cynthia demanded. What is your purpose? Our purpose is to help you, Laurelai said. But our methods are unconventional. We have come to a radical conclusion. The key to understanding and fighting the Unraveler does not lie in our world. It lies in the place where the laws of our world are inverted. The place that acts as the final layer of the seal of origin. The Distortion world, Ash said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Precisely, Laurelai confirmed. The Unraveler is a being of absolute nothingness. Its opposite is not something, but everything. The Distortion world is a realm of chaotic, infinite potential. More importantly, its ruler, Giratina, is the third pillar of the seal. It has been exposed to the Unraveler's influence longer and more directly than any other being. It is the only one who can give us the answers we need. Her plan was beginning to form, and it was as terrifying as it was logical. You want us to go to the Distortion world, Cynthia stated. We want to send you there, Laurelai corrected. But not just to talk. Our research indicates that Giratina itself is in danger. The constant pressure of the Unraveler's influence is corrupting it, turning it from a guardian into a rabid beast. The Distortion in Eterna Forest, the Avatar on Spearpillar, they were just leaks. The main breach is happening inside the Distortion world, with Giratina at its heart. She looked at Ash, her expression deeply serious. We believe your aura, your power to reaffirm existence, is the only thing that can purge the corruption from Giratina. To save it. And in doing so, you will not only gain a powerful ally, but you may restabilize the seal and learn how to fight the Unraveler from the being that knows it best. The sheer scale of the plan was breathtaking. It was insane. It was also the only course of action that felt like it might actually work. And what if you're wrong? Ash challenged. What if we go in there and get erased? Or what if Giratina is already too far gone? Then the world is likely doomed anyway, Laurelai replied with a chilling frankness. But we believe in you, Ash. We are staking our faith not on a prophecy, but on your proven record. Before they could process this, a new sound cut through the night. The high-pitched whine of advanced engines. A dozen black, angular aircraft, the Aegis VTOLS, descended from the sky, their searchlights cutting brilliant white swathes across the meadow. Simultaneously, a net of crackling blue energy shot out of the darkness and enveloped Laurelai. She didn't even flinch. Aegis, she sighed, as if mildly inconvenienced. Their timing is impeccable, I'll give them that. Commander Valerius's voice boomed from a loudspeaker on the lead VTOL. Ash Ketchum. Cynthia. Laurelai. You are surrounded. Do not resist. Power down all electronic devices and surrender your Pokémon. From the edge of the woods, a barrage of smoke grenades erupted, blanketing the area between the VTOLS and their position. Looker's diversion. Go. Laurelai shouted, pulling a strange, crystalline device from her pocket. This was the real plan. They can have me. You are the priority. The device was a shard of obsidian, humming with an incredible energy. It looked like it had been carved from the very fabric of the reverse world. This will open a temporary gateway. It's unstable, it will only last a few seconds. You have to go now, she yelled over the rising chaos of shouting Aegis operatives and the whir of the VTOLS. The net holding her tightened, and she grunted in pain. Valerius is a fool, but he's not stupid. He won't risk a direct fight in a populated area. He brought containment tech. You can't fight it. You have to run. Ash and Cynthia were frozen, caught between the approaching Aegis forces and Laurelai's insane escape plan. She's right, Ash. Cynthia said, grabbing his arm. We can't let Aegis capture us. This is our only chance. Ash looked at Laurelai, who gave him a sharp, determined nod. He made his choice. Okay. Do it. Laurelai slammed the obsidian shard into the ground. It did not explode. It imploded. The world twisted. The beautiful meadow of flowers dissolved into a screaming vortex of impossible colors and broken physics. A hole tore open in reality, a gaping wound that led into a world of floating islands, sideways waterfalls, and a sky that was a nauseating swirl of gold and black. The air itself seemed to turn inside out. Now! Laurelai screamed, just as two Aegis operatives in heavy armor tackled her to the ground. Ash and Cynthia didn't hesitate. They leaped into the portal. The world dissolved. Ash felt a sensation of being stretched, compressed, and turned inside out all at the same time. He held on to Cynthia's hand, a single point of stability in the maelstrom. They landed hard on a floating slab of rock, the portal snapping shut behind them with a sound like tearing fabric. They were in the Distortion world. The silence here was a living entity. It was a pressure, a weight, a complete absence of the familiar sounds of life. There was no wind, only the slow, silent drift of the bizarre landscape. Jagged islands of rock and earth floated in a golden void, connected by bridges of shimmering, unstable energy. Water flowed upwards into nothingness. Trees grew upside down, their roots clutching at the void. Ash pushed himself up, his head spinning. The physics of this place were a constant assault on the senses. Everyone okay? Cynthia was already on her feet, her expression a mixture of scientific awe and profound unease. Define okay. We are here. We are in one piece. Beyond that, all definitions are relative. Ash pulled out his pokeballs, releasing his team. Dragonite, Surfetched, Jengar, and Dracovish appeared, looking around in confusion and distress. The unnatural environment was deeply unsettling to them. Pikachu, who had leaped through the portal at the last second with them, was clinging to Ash's leg, his body trembling. But it was the air that was the worst part. It was cold, thin, and carried a taint that Ash recognized instantly. It was the same cold, empty feeling he'd felt from the Avatar, but diluted, suffused into the very atmosphere of this world. The Unraveler's influence was here. It was everywhere. Laurelai was right, Cynthia murmured, her hand tracing a patch of rock that seemed to be decaying. It was slowly crumbling, not into dust, but into pixels of black nothingness that simply vanished. This world is sick. It's being unmade from the inside out. A deep, guttural roar echoed through the silence, a sound of pure, unrestrained agony. It shook the floating island they stood on, and a shower of decaying rock dust rained down from above. Giratina, Ash said, his voice grim. They followed the sound, leaping across floating stones and traversing shimmering, unstable bridges. The landscape grew more chaotic and hostile the deeper they went. Patches of the world were missing entirely, replaced by the same shimmering voids of pure nothingness they had seen on Spearpillar. Tendrils of dark energy, corrupted by the void, lashed out from the environment, forcing them to dodge and weave. They found it in what must have been the heart of the realm. A vast, open space where a colossal, floating crystal structure was slowly crumbling into nothing. And in the center of that space was Giratina. It was a horrifying sight. The majestic lord of antimatter was a monster. Its beautiful, platinum gold armor was cracked and tarnished. Its 6 shadowy, spectral wings were tattered and torn. And like the Trevenant, patches of its body were being consumed by the shimmering, corrosive void of the Unraveler. Its red eyes, usually so intelligent and ancient, were glowing with a rabid, mindless fury. It was a caged god, maddened by a poison that was eating it alive. It saw them. With a scream of rage and pain, it lunged, its massive head swinging like a wrecking ball. "Scatter!" Cynthia yelled. They dove apart just as Giratina's head smashed into the island they were on, shattering it into a dozen smaller pieces. Ash landed on one fragment, Cynthia on another, his Pokémon scrambling for purchase on the unstable ground. "This isn't a rescue mission anymore," Ash shouted across the void. "This is a boss battle. We can't fight it. We'll be erased." Cynthia countered, her Garchomp already out and shielding her from a blast of corrupted shadow force. "We don't have a choice," Ash yelled back. "We have to subdue it. We have to get close enough for me to use my aura." He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that this was the ultimate test. He had to do what he did for the Trevenant, but to a legendary Pokémon 1,000 times more powerful, while it was actively trying to erase him from existence, in a world that was collapsing around them, and with his own powers still wounded and unreliable. The odds weren't just long, they were non-existent. "Then we do it together," Cynthia roared, her resolve hardening. The champion was back. "Garchomp, Togekiss. Your job is to defend Ash. Dragonite, Surfetch'd, you're with me. We run interference. We create the opening. Pikachu, Gengar, Dracovish, you harry it. Keep it off balance. Go." The battle was a ballet of impossible, three-dimensional chaos. Cynthia's Garchomp and Togekiss formed a living shield around Ash, their bodies glowing as they deflected blasts of void-tainted energy. Cynthia, riding her own Dragonite, led Surfetch'd in a daring series of hit-and-run attacks, her commands sharp and precise, forcing Giratina to divide its attention. Pikachu, Gengar, and Dracovish became a whirlwind of disruptive energy. Pikachu's thunderbolts, amplified by the strange energies of the Distortion world, were massive. Gengar phased through floating rocks, launching shadow balls from impossible angles. Dracovish, using its powerful jaws, latched onto Giratina's tail, its fishious wren surprisingly effective against the enraged god. But it was like trying to fight a hurricane with sticks. Giratina was too big, too powerful, too consumed by its mindless rage. It thrashed and roared, its attacks tearing the very fabric of the dimension. A single swipe of its claws sent Surfetch tumbling, saved only by a last-second rescue from Cynthia's dragonite. Ash stood on his floating rock, a small island of calm in the raging storm. He closed his eyes, ignoring the chaos. He ignored the instinct to fight, to command. He had to do something else. He had to reach deeper. The place where Lucario's presence used to be was a painful, hollow void. He didn't try to ignore it. He focused on it. He embraced the pain, the loss. His aura wasn't just a weapon. It was connection. And connection was not just about strength. It was about empathy. It was about understanding pain. He opened himself to the pain of this place. To Giratina's agony. He felt its confusion, its terror, its loneliness as it felt itself being unmade. He resonated with it. His own aura began to glow, but it wasn't the strong, confident blue from Spearpillar. It was a softer, paler light, tinged with the sorrow he felt for Lucario, for Giratina, for this dying world. He had to get closer. "Cynthia," he yelled, his voice cutting through the din, "I need a path. Now." Cynthia saw the change in him, the soft light emanating from his body. She understood instantly. This was it. All units. Concentrate fire on its head. Full power. Buy him 10 seconds, she commanded, her voice ringing with absolute authority. Every Pokémon, hers and Ash's, unleashed everything they had. A combined torrent of fire, ice, dragon energy, and electricity slammed into Giratina's face. The god roared in fury, shaking its massive head, its attention completely focused on the overwhelming assault. The path was clear. Ash ran. He leaped from his floating rock to another, his feet sure and steady. He felt his partners, his friends, buying him this one, desperate chance with their own lives. He would not waste it. He launched himself from the final rock, a flying leap across the void, straight at the colossal, thrashing body of the corrupted god. He was a speck of dust flying toward a mountain. He landed on Giratina's back, his hands slamming flat against the cold, platinum armor, right next to a shimmering, corrosive patch of void. And he pushed. He didn't project memories of sunshine and trees this time. He projected his own pain. He showed Giratina the silent, hollow place where his bond with Lucario used to be. He shared the agony of being disconnected, of being unmade. He met Giratina's pain not with a cure, but with empathy. "I know," his aura seemed to whisper, a message that transcended words. "I know it hurts. But you are not alone." A connection sparked. A tiny, fragile thread in the overwhelming darkness. Giratina's thrashing lessened, just for a second. Its maddened red eye flickered, a spark of its true consciousness surfacing through the rage. It felt this tiny, mortal creature, sharing its pain, understanding its torment. It wasn't a cure. It was a recognition. The void, the Unraveler's influence, sensed this new connection, this affirmation of existence. It fought back. The patch of nothingness next to Ash's hand flared, lashing out at him. But before it could touch him, a new force intervened. From the pokeball on Ash's belt, a beam of red light shot out, and Lucario materialized on Giratina's back. It was still gray, still weak, but its eyes were no longer hollow. They were burning with a fierce, protective light. It had felt Ash's pain, his empathy, his desperate gamble. And it had answered the call, dragging itself from the depths of its own trauma. Lucario placed its own paw over Ash's hand, and a new, different aura, its own, flowed into him. It was weak, flickering, but it was there. The bond was not gone. It was just broken. And now, together, they began to mend it. Their two auras, his raw and empathetic, Lucario's disciplined and focused, intertwined. They became a single, powerful current. Ash's empathy gave them the connection, and Lucario's focus gave them the strength. Together, they pushed back against the void. A brilliant, blinding light, a mixture of blue and gold, erupted from them, washing over Giratina's massive frame. It was the light of a mended bond, a reaffirmed connection. It was the ultimate antithesis to the Unraveler's nothingness. Giratina's roars of agony changed, becoming a cry of catharsis, of release. The patches of void on its body hissed and dissolved, not into nothing, but back into the shimmering, healthy platinum of its skin. The maddened red light in its eyes faded, replaced by the ancient, deep intelligence of a god reborn. The dimension itself seemed to sigh in relief. The decay slowed, the hostile energy receded. The storm was over. Ash collapsed onto Giratina's back, utterly spent, Lucario falling beside him. He looked at his partner, whose color was slowly, faintly, returning. He placed a trembling hand on its head. "I'm here," he felt, not heard, in his mind. A weak but definite presence. Lucario was back. Giratina, now lucid, lowered its massive head, its now clear red eye regarding the two small beings on its back with a look of profound, ancient gratitude. It had been saved. Purged. It opened its mouth, but instead of a roar, a voice echoed directly in all of their minds, a voice of scraping continents and stellar winds. The archetype. The bond. It is as the prophecy foretold. It turned its gaze to the void of its dimension, where a fresh wound had been torn by their entry. Through it, they could see the moonlit sky of their own world. "The threat is greater than you know," Giratina's voice echoed. "The avatar you faced is but a splinter, a sliver of its power. The Unraveler does not seek to enter your world. It seeks to erase it. It has already begun. There is a place, a nexus, where its influence pools. A place of deep cold and forgotten things." Giratina showed them a vision in their minds. A stark, white landscape of ice and snow. A ruined temple, buried deep beneath a glacier. And in its heart, something was pulsing with a cold, dark light. "The Snow Point Temple," Cynthia breathed, recognizing the location. "You must go there," Giratina commanded. "But you are not yet strong enough. The archetype is wounded. The bond is fragile." It focused its gaze on Ash. "But you have my allegiance. And my power. I will send you back. And I will lend you my strength when the time is right. Now go. The Aegis hunts you. The poacher seeks my corrupted shell. Your world is running out of time." With a beat of its now whole spectral wings, Giratina flew toward the portal. It passed through the tear in reality, carrying all of them on its back, and emerged into the moonlit night of Floaroma Meadow. They landed softly amidst the flowers just as the portal to the Distortion world sealed itself shut. The Aegis VTOLs were still there, their searchlights frantically sweeping the area where the portal had been. Operatives were swarming the field. Giratina let out one, final, declarative roar. It was not a sound of rage, but a proclamation. A warning. The ground shook, and the Aegis forces were thrown into chaos and confusion. In that moment of chaos, Giratina lowered its head, allowing them to slide to the ground. Then, with a power that bent reality, it vanished, retreating back to its own, now healing dimension. They were left standing in the meadow, battered, exhausted, but changed. Ash looked down at Lucario, now standing shakily on its own, and then at Cynthia, whose face was a mask of awe and grim determination. They had survived. They had saved a god and mended a bond. But they had also learned the location of their next battle. And they had the full, undivided attention of everyone who wanted to control them. The hunt was about to get deadlier. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.